The conference is about to start. Please take your seats. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the International Conference on WHO Pandemic Treaty Negotiation. This conference is jointly organized by the Office of International Cooperation, Ministry of Health and Welfare, Executive Yuan, the Research Center for International Organization and Trade Law, NCCU, and the Zhonghua International Trade Association, with the Department of International Business, NCCU, serving as a co-organizer. Today, we are honored to welcome Professor Yang Huanghua, Director of the Research Center for International Organization and Trade Law, to give us opening remarks. Now, let's give a warm round of applause to invite Professor Yang Huanghua to the stage.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests from overseas, and old friends, a lot of old friends, and also some graduate students who are interested in today's discussion. And on behalf of the Research Center of the International Organization and Trade Law, together with the other two organizers, including Ministry of Health and Welfare, and Zhonghua International Trade Association. I would like to welcome you to today's conference. As a matter of fact, since last year, March 2023, the negotiation of the Pandemic Treaty negotiation started. Taiwan has closely followed up its development. Despite the fact that Taiwan is not a party of WHO due to some political boycott by some parties, we always try to make efforts to the global health protection because, well, we know that pathogens has never been constrained by national borders. Therefore, last year, September, our MOFA office in Geneva held an international conference on the subject, which was well received by many scholars. And I think some of the guests today, including Professor Takama, also attended last year's conference. And therefore, we are very happy today that we continue this dialogue with insights of all the experts today. I believe we are going to have a very fruitful discussion, which will be valuable for the pandemic treaty negotiation to take into reference. And today's conference will be video recorded. There are two camera pairs, and after the conference, we are all going to upload the recording to the YouTube channel to share with the more general public, and in order to remind all of the people the importance of this treaties negotiation. Therefore, I would like to ask your assistance to pay attention to the two camera and hold the microphone close to your mouth in order to have a good quality of recordings. And I will not waste your time, and let's the conference today begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yang, for your inspirational speech. We now invite Professor Yang and the guests to step forward for a group photo at the front stage. As for all our attendees, please remain seated as the first session will begin right after the group photo.
Yes, please.
一起吧，一起吧。
一起吧。你们就还要拿，因为这个人没有很多。
那个布条请帮我弄中间。
对，在中间。
过来一点，好。这样子可以吗？
好。3、2、1，3、2、1，
多拍几张哦，3、2、1。好，稍等一下哦。可以再侧一点点，
不好意思 ，stand side this and we can.
Yeah. Okay.
你要不要退到后一栏？
好，
退到后面一个地方，这样就不用。可以吗？
这样还行。
还可以，就不用再退了，是吧
OK，Thank you。
Now we move to session 1 of today's discussion. The topic is Governance, Equity, and Transparency of WHO Pandemic Treaty Negotiation, featuring 3 papers. We are honored to have academic executive fellow Lin Caiyu from the Asian Center for WTO and International Health Law and Policy, National Taiwan University College of Law, serve as the chairperson. The discussant will be Professor Cai Fengzhen, Professor of the Program in Global Health and Health Security, College of Public Health, Taipei Medical University. The speakers are Professor Kayo Takuma from Department of Law, Keio University, Associate Professor Li Chongling from Graduate Institute of Health and Biotechnology Law at Taipei Medical University, and Professor Yang Keikan from Department of International Business, National Zhengzhi University. Each speaker will have 20 minutes to present their paper. A bell and time card will be used to notify speakers at the 5-minute, 3-minute, and end marks. Following all presentations, a 5-minute Q&A session will be held, and we encourage all attendees to participate actively. Thank you. Now, let's welcome Professor Lin Caiyu to deliver the opening remarks for this session.
Thank you very much. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a very warm welcome to this session. This session is the first session of WHO Pandemic Treaty Negotiation. Actually, I think Untapped Potentials Treaty is very, very important, a very urgent need for our world to care about. Why I say so? I think we saw the COVID pandemic over the years. We can find that everybody just suffered from such pandemic in health, care, and in social, and or in their economic activities. So we really learned a lot. Really get a lesson, and is that no one, including the single government, single country, or even the individual, can really face such huge pandemic issues alone. So we like to have our vision to fight the definitely coming next pandemic. The global approach or collective efforts should be very important. It's for myself, I really pleased to come back again in Zhengda. And today we are so lucky, fortunate to have 3 papers to present, authored by Professor Takuma from Japan and Chongling from Taipei Medical Universities. And Professor Yang, I think there's no need for me to introduce everyone because you can check or to read the detailed information about speakers in our program. So right now I just give the floor to Professor Takuma. Please.
Thank you, Professor Lin, for your remarks. We now move to the first paper presentation of session 1. The speaker is Professor Kayo Takuma. And the paper title is Multilayered Health Governance and the Possibility of Taiwan's Participation in it. Let us welcome her with warm applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Schaefer from Keio University of Japan. First of all, I would like to express my deepest appreciation for everyone who have organized and prepared this important conference. Today, I would like to speak about how the global health governance has changed under the pandemic and how to incorporate Taiwan into the global framework. So let me start. Let me sit down and start. Yes, because of the increasing political tension worldwide, it has become more and more difficult to cooperate at the global level. And under such circumstances, regional cooperation or a smaller unit, cooperation at a smaller unit, such as a regional level or cooperation among like-minded countries, have activated. So I would like to focus on such a situation. And my presentation does not directly refer to the pandemic treaty itself, but I would like to focus on the changing environment surrounding the pandemic treaty negotiation of the pandemic treaty. And this is the outline of my of today's presentation. In the first section, I would like to explain how the global health governance has changed under the pandemic. And in the next section, I would like to introduce various health efforts in Asia, such as efforts by South Korea or by Japan. And in the final section, I would like to examine how to incorporate Taiwan in the future health governance. We vividly remember Taiwan's exemplary response to the pandemic, and for strengthening the health security worldwide, and as well as in Asia, I think it is necessary to incorporate Taiwan into the present framework. Since the beginning of human history, we humans have lived with various infectious diseases such as cholera, typhus, or smallpox. This chart shows the countries which have reported cases of mpox since the start of this year. Not just mpox, but also avian flu, H5N1, has also spread mainly in the Americas. It is true that we have overcome the COVID-19 pandemic, but in this way, we are still facing the threat of various infectious diseases. The difficulty here is that in this international society, which is comprised of sovereign states, there is no kind of world government or any superior authority to control these infectious diseases, which easily cross borders. Therefore, how to effectively control infectious diseases is the most laborious challenge in the global health governance. There are various definitions of the global health governance. Here, I would like to introduce the definition of by Dr. David Figura, which says that the use of formal and informal institutions, rules, and processes by states, intergovernmental organizations, and non-state actors to deal with challenges to health that require cross-border collective action to address effectively. As described here, global health governance is primarily a framework for addressing worldwide health-related challenges, in which not only states, but also various non-state actors participate. And the procedures and approaches to cope with those challenges are not always formal ones, such as concluding treaties or establishing some legal frameworks, but include informal procedures such as deals or appeals. Here I'd like to summarize the recent trends in global health governance in the wake of COVID-19. Firstly, the experience of pandemic made the world reaffirm the importance of some norms, such as One Health, universal health coverage, or equity as a basis of the better pandemic preparedness and response. All of those norms are supposed to be written in the pandemic treaty. And the second trend is that the importance of non-hierarchical approach has been reaffirmed. During the Cold War, for example, the general approach in the global health was that superpower countries, superpowers such as the then Soviet Union or the United States, gave various medical resources such as vaccines or medicines or financial resources to developing countries, which is not necessarily the major approach for now. Instead, vaccines produced or developed produced in India were exported to developed countries during the pandemic, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is now one of the biggest donors to the WHO. In this way, non-hierarchical approach is becoming the mainstream in the global health governance. And thirdly, as I mentioned earlier, the global health governance has become more and more political. Decades ago, pandemic preparedness and response was recognized as a challenge just for developing countries, which came to be recognized as part of security in many developed countries, including Japan and the United States. Each country is now taking a more strategic approach to pandemic preparedness and response, making it difficult to cooperate at the global level. And concerning the political impact on the pandemic response, there are too many examples concerning this point. Specifically, the confrontation between the U.S. and China over the origin of the outbreak is still fresh in our memories. When the virus impact was limited in China, there was still room for the U.S. and China to cooperate. However, since the virus spread in the United States the then U.S. President Donald Trump criticized the WHO as too close to China, and decided to withdraw from the WHO. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also had an impact on global health governance. For example, World Health Assembly held in last May, some countries opposed to Russia's participation. In addition, at the meeting of the WHO European Regional Office, where both Russia and Ukraine participate, resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine was adopted. They also requested the WHO's Director General to relocate the WHO's office in Moscow or to another country. So in this way, political tension worldwide have a significant impact on the global health governance. Under such circumstances, the structure of the global health governance has become multi-layered. As this chart shows, the structure of the global health governance is originally multi-layered, which is comprised of multiple levels, such as regional or national or among like-minded countries. And actors have focused on the strengthening the pandemic preparedness and response capacity at regional, national, or national levels or among like-minded countries. Looking back on history, the framework for dealing with health challenges has remained a multi-layered structure, especially at the regional level. Neighboring countries generally share the same challenges, such as malaria in Africa or yellow fever in America. And historically, regional health cooperation has developed ahead of the cooperation at the global level. Concerning the recent movement, I have briefly summarized the recent movement of the at each level, global, including the global, regional, and among like-minded countries. And at the global level, the revision of the IHR, International Health Regulation 2005, was agreed in this May, and as you know, the negotiation of a new pandemic treaty is in progress. and is expected to finalize by May of next year. And at the regional level, the European Health Union was agreed to create in Europe. And in Africa, which suffers the world's largest vaccine shortage during the pandemic, the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust, AVAT, and the African Medicines Agency were created to compensate the deficiencies of the global framework, such as COVAX. And in Asia, there is no framework that covers the entire region, like Africa or Europe, but various regional efforts have been made by South Korea or Japan. Let me explain the historical background of the regional health cooperation in Asia. Actually, regional health cooperation in Asia has a long history. In pre-war Asia, various infectious diseases such as cholera or plague were prevalent. And in 1925, the Singapore Epidemiological Intelligence Station was established by the League of Nations Health Organization at the request of the Japanese government. This station was established as the regional office of the League of Nations Health Organization. And Taiwan that was at that time under the control of Japan, was part of this framework, cooperative framework. Member countries sent the disease information of their territory to this station, and in turn, the member countries shared the various information received the various infectious disease information overseas. And after the Second World War, there was no framework in Asia that covers the entire region, such as the Singapore station, but regional health cooperation has progressed after the pandemic. For example, South Korea aims to strengthen its health cooperation with Southeast Asian countries through the WHO Biomanufacturing Training Hub that was established in last year. And during the pandemic, 12 countries that includes the US, Japan, Australia, and India cooperated on the COVID vaccine. So in this way, during the pandemic, regional health cooperation has developed in Asia. And concerning Japan, Japan has also strengthened the cooperation, especially with Southeast Asian countries. Japan under the former Abe administration announced to help establish the ASEAN Center for Public Health Emergency and Emerging Diseases, ASEAN Center for Public Health Emergency and Emerging Diseases. In addition, Japan's National Center for Global Health and Medicines, NCGM, has created an international clinical research and trial network called ALLIES with Southeast Asian countries. Furthermore, in the beginning of this year, US CDC established its regional office in Asia Pacific in Tokyo, which is expected to cooperate with the Japan CDC to strengthen the global health security in Asia. And I'd like to move to the last section, in which I would like to examine how to incorporate Taiwan in the global framework. According to the latest draft of the pandemic treaty, multi-layered structure of the global health governance is assumed. For example, Article 7 says that each party shall endeavor to strengthen national capacity and designate or establish as appropriate national, and or regional level multidisciplinary emergency health teams. So in this way, some article of the latest draft of the pandemic treaty allow health efforts at non-global level, such as regional, national, or other multilateral setting. In this way, multi-layered structure of the recent global health governance is assumed in the pandemic treaty, and cooperation at non-global levels are required to fill the deficiency of the effort at the global health governance. And Here is my argument that because of the increasing, as I explained in my presentation, because of the increasing political tension, it has become more and more difficult to cooperate at the global level, making regional health cooperation and a cooperation among like-minded countries more important. And despite this difficulty, I also believe that the cooperation at the global level is still important as providing common norms and rules worldwide, such as One Health, equity, or universal health coverage, that is universal health coverage. From such a perspective, it is important to establish a public treaty, and also important to keep efforts to incorporate Taiwan into the global corporate framework, such as World Health Assembly or public treaty. On the other hand, there is still a big challenge for Taiwan's full participation in global health governance. And from that perspective, I think that it is necessary to informally bring Taiwan into regional frameworks to strengthen regional health security, such as through connecting Taiwan to Japan's regional efforts. More concretely, it may be possible to incorporate Taiwan into the U.S.-Japan cooperation U.S.-Japan cooperation to strengthen health security in Asia-Pacific region. It may be also possible to incorporate Taiwan into Japan's various efforts with Southeast Asian countries, such as ASEAN Center for Public Health, or the NCGM's International Critical Network with Southeast Asian countries. So so such efforts not only benefit the preparedness and response capacity of each country, but also reinforce the global cooperative system. So that's all from my part. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Takuma. And now we first invite Professor Yang Pei-Kat, presenting a paper titled Exploring the Role of Non-Parties' Participation in the WHO Pandemic Agreement Negotiation from the Perspective of Transparency. Let us warmly welcome Professor Yang.
Thank you very much. I think it should be Professor Lee, but she hasn't shown up, so I will be the second presentation. My topics here, I just try to talk about exploring the role of non-parties participation in the WHO Pandemic Agreement Negotiation from the perspective of transparency. Okay, so following up for the last presentation that Professor Takuma says about the cooperation is very important in developing the global health governance. And I'm wondering how that will make it happen. Okay, so I think that one of the reasons I would like to have this kind of discussions is that, as we already know, that Taiwan is not a member to the WHO. So throughout the whole process of negotiation, it's very difficult for us to be able to participate officially or formally into the whole process. But our people's health will be affected by whatever outcome will be in the end of the negotiation. So I think that this is a very important issue for us, as well as for the global community as well. So I think that this is my motivations to try to do something about it and say, and I find that the principle of transparency or so-called equity might be one of the point that we can see through, whether through that kind of provisions or principle that has been alleged by the WHO itself. Can we just find something useful that we can push furthermore? So actually, this is my outlines. Background principle, non-parties will be the basic concept that I need to have a brief definition. And then I will focus on the transparency, what kind of function that the principle might have, so that we can use that kind of, to fulfill that kind of function, so that can let the non-parties to be able to get engaged in the whole process. And the final one will be the assessment and suggestion. Okay, so that is what I would like to say for my presentation. As for the background, as we all know that this is the timeline, very briefly speaking, since 2012, 21 December, the WHO held a very unique special sessions, okay, just for these kind of issues. As they decide that they will establish an international negotiating body to negotiate the treaties, okay. Basically, they didn't require what kind of format, actually, is convention, treaties, agreement, any kind of instruments to respond, so to prepare for the future pandemic that might happen in the future. And then after that, then they have run nine sections of IMB, okay, and they originally expect to have an outcome that can be presented in the 77th WHA that will be held in May this year. But we all know that it's failed. Okay, it fails to have a consensus toward. Even the IMB had not submitted a consensus version of the agreement, so that they finally extend the mandate. Okay, so continue negotiation. So we can expect that it will not be finished soon. So hopefully, at least maybe this will be only really the beginning. Maybe we can meet another time next year. And still not yet completed the negotiation. So they expected to then they extended that. So they already have the IMB 10, 11, and 12. Okay. And originally they might need to have a special session toward the end of this year to wrap it up, but I doubt it. So maybe hopefully next year's WHA, okay, so will be 78th WHA will be the timing, possible timing to conclude the negotiation. Okay, just possible, but not for sure. But or you can know that this is the timeline. Okay, so through this timeline we can see how controversial it is. Okay, and there's a saying. The U.S. presidential election saying that it is President Clinton saying that election is an economic issue. Economic is the key. Okay? And I would like here to say that health issue is all political still. Okay? So actually, it's all political driven consideration as far as I can see. Health is important, but especially talking about the treaty negotiations, it is the political, this kind of allocation of the resources, kind of the power struggle they have to do with that. So that is the guiding principle that the decision made by WHA has been officially alleged, revealed by themselves. Okay, these are the key terms that you will see from time to time when you talk about these pandemic treaties. Okay, such as inclusiveness, okay, transparency, efficiency, okay, member state leadership, consensus. And till the WHA 77 sections, they added more equity and solidarity as the guiding principle. And these are the terms shown in the official document, the official decisions. Okay. So I just want to point out for you that some of them are related, such as equity, transparency, okay, and inclusiveness, solidarity. Okay, so overall speaking, that you can know that these are only beautiful slogans. Okay, how to implement it and enforce it in the real provision is another question. But I would like to use that kind of principles, try to develop my argument that how non-party is so essential for us to be able to So who are those non-parties? Actually, WHO also recognize this is an important issue. So they already included some of the sort of non-state actors engaged in the negotiation. So for every IMP section, basically they will invite those non-state actors to get engaged. But they have different level of right. For example, some of the closed meetings they might not be able to attend, but some public meetings they can be able to attend and speak out. So, but in any event, they know that this is important. So these are the so-called non-parties that has been recognized by the WHA or WHO, such as representative of the Organization of United Nations system. Okay, so you name it. Okay, but here would be not clearly recognized as a non-parties by WHA is what I would like to stress, point out. As an individual, okay, non-WHO members such as Taiwan, okay, and Taiwan is very unique situation, so even inferior than Palestine's, okay, or other political entity state. So this is what I think that we might need to think about that. But we have to have a definition of non-parties, but most of them are included in the document. Okay, and why non-parties participation matters? And so this is, I think that we need to talk about. And I think that this is nothing new. Actually, we already mentioned, such as virus respect no borders. So actually, in order to make those rules be effective, that you should include as much entities or much state or much parties involved in the whole process as possible. That will make these whole provisions effective. And efficiency equity concerns as well. Health as a public goods, and if your provision deal with the distribution of public goods, then we need to get more parties involved in the process or in the regime. Justice as another one, and health as a fundamental human right. I think that this would be no one would disagree. Okay, but it's very difficult to really enforce or implement. But at least I think that this is also one of the concerns that we think that the non-parties participation is really matter for the overall successful conclusion of the agreement. Okay, so in terms of the transparency principle, I think that it's used to be not so important in the international law settings. As you know that state negotiates, normally they will do it in a confidential manner, right? It is easier for them to be able to negotiate to a certain outcome and to give it a certain outcome. So they are not willing others to know about what they're going to talk about. But right now, it is not the international trend. Right now, we all require a democratic process, transparent process right now. So they evolve, they change, okay. But still, original concept of transparency still focus on more procedure-oriented tools, as for example, access to informations, notifications, that kind of things, requirement that they apply transparency principles to require state to reveal the necessary information, to share, exchange the information that what they have. But in my paper, I think that we should adopt a broader view on transparency to focus more on substantive normative values of this principle, such as that you probably need to focus on the function of participation in the rulemaking or even implementation of the treaties. Okay, so the participation function will be could be one of the function that the transparency principle can achieve. And then the second will be engagement of deliberation of law. Okay, review deliberation means the process of discussions. Sometimes they will involve with expert, technical discussion, but also involve with kind of political process or democratic process. But in that could also be one aspect of function that transparency principle can have. And then assurance of accountability, I think that might another aspect of function that transparency principle can have. Accountability will be that you will know the decision made, you have to be responsible for whatever you decide, that kind of democratic value that we all share with. And finally, as I mentioned, effective order implementations also will be that function. So here I would like to incorporate these 4 to 5 functions that the transparency principle might have in the discussion of the following analysis. Okay, and then since the time is limited, so I think that I would like to, the next part actually just to point out the relevant provisions that might have anything to do, a little bit connection to do with transparency. So I just try to summarize it for the further discussions. Okay, so just like Professor Takuma mentioned about some of the provisions regarding whether Taiwan can be able to participate in the region, that we can, based on the wordings of the text, that might lead us to think that transparency might be important for us to rely on, based on the textual language of the provision. Okay, but when I do the research here, I face difficulties because the version changed a lot. Okay, so every version of the draft text actually doesn't look like, and even the provisions, they will drop some. Okay, delete some provisions. This is very difficult task for me to be able to really identify the correct provision or which version. Okay, so it might mix. So bear with me. Sorry about this, but I just want to let you know this is my step of research. I try to summarize some of the useful provisions that might be relevant to transparency. And here are what I already point out, and there's underline will be the terms might be relevant to transparency, okay, and italic. So I just let you to have a look at that, and and this is from preamble, okay, and here as per the recital 6, 8, we have already. So for example, some of the coordinate, appropriate, comprehensive, equal, equitable, collaboration, cooperation. I think that these are the relevant terms that we might rely on for further development in discussion. Okay, as here, political commitment, whatever, equitable access to health product, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I will skip a quick. Okay, but the chapter 3 might have less, but some of the provisions, such as the conference of the party provisions, sometimes very important, especially when dealing with the observers, the rule of procedures, etc., and might also be relevant also to us. Okay, so in terms of the assessment, based on the relevant provisions, and I divided into different functions to see that whether those provisions could be either integrated in a way that could accommodate non-party in the process, or maybe needed to add more or clarify further so that non-parties will be able to make use of these provisions to be able to engage. Okay, so I think that this is a big task and not so easy, because sometimes the negotiators might not have the same thinking as we try to interpret it. But in any event, I just try to point out that there are some wordings that normally the negotiators would like to use, such as they will refer to proper bodies, okay, entities, okay, and the bodies, entities are not limited to the state, I think, or doesn't limit it to organizations or the international organizations that has been recognized or have associated with WHO. Okay, so whether that kind of term could be a possible place, basis for us to be able to claim that, okay, such as Taiwan can be part of that, okay, and this is what I think that, for example, the rulemaking participations, deliberations, they will establish some of the expert group, okay, technical review group or something like that. And if that is not necessarily limited to the member state, whether Taiwan could be part of that kind of process. Or, for example, PAPS, and I think that later we'll have more discussions. Let me see. Pathogen access and benefit sharing. If we, Taiwan, could be willing, voluntarily engage in the mechanism, could be make use of that kind of mechanism, even if that we are not members to the WHO. Okay. So I think that there are several places that I think it is matters for us. It also matters for the whole global community that we need to make use of those terms that have the flexibility to be able to incorporate those non-parties, be able to be participate in the whole process, or be engaged in the mechanism. And I think that is very key for us, or either for the WHO as a whole. So they also have, I also have selected issues, and that I would like to share. But some of these actually are already presented in the last year's Geneva conference together with Professor Takuma. We already have a conference back to last year as held in Geneva, and I just attend online. And so some of those suggestions or issues that I point out, actually I already made before, so that I just for you for your reference. Several of that, and sorry about this. Some I will not reiterate it because of time. Okay, so basically what I think to wrap it up, I think that. Just Professor Takuma already mentioned the corporations, non-hierarchical cooperation, as you mentioned. I look carefully, and how can we make that happen is actually the key. Okay, and I agree with the regional approach might be a good starting point, but eventually we should place Taiwan in a more global level, right? We cannot just rely on regional or bilateral approach. That might not be so useful or comprehensive enough. So I think eventually that might be another way we need to think about. And what I think might be, and this is only my preliminary thought, as such kind of health entity, okay, in order for us to be able to officially sit in the negotiation. Okay. I don't know, but I think that we have to try, okay, as we are a member to the WTO, okay, but it's different organization, we know that. But still, I think that we need to figure out how can we make sure that we will be able to participate and be part of the global health community. Thank you very much. So I was assigned that Professor Lee is coming. Okay, so I have to say words. Few minutes. He's coming. So I have to say more minutes. Okay, maybe. Okay, I can explain more. Or any quick reflection or questions that we can share. But I just to emphasize that. I think I don't know because one thing is for good is that making friends in the global community. So we have a friend from different countries be able to share information. But as far as I know, that our government officials try to get engaged, just asking the friend inside the room to be able to share those negotiation document or information so that we can receive those documents simultaneously with other negotiators. Okay, so we do really want to contribute, and we will be able to, but we have no standing. I know the good positions to be able to do that. So I think that this is the ultimate problem for us, for Taiwan. And the topics here I would like to share is still toward this direction, but I would like to reduce the political color, do not say it too out loud. So my suggestion here, or my analysis here, will focus on how can we use the transparency principle as a starting point, the guiding principle, so that we can review all of those provisions that you should take into account. So for example, accountability. This is actually what I thought. Accountability used to be put in the guiding principle in the original version, but they deleted it. I don't know why. Okay. And accountability, normally we place accountability on the state. Okay. But as we know from the experience of COVID-19, I think that accountability should also require a place on the international organization itself. Okay, do we really need that kind of rules or provisions that prescribe in the treaties? In addition to state, we all know that state have to bear the accountability. But how about the international organizations? Or even further, some of those involved in the whole process, such as intermediary bodies involved, they might, or some of not really NGOs, some of those organizations that have associated with WHO, and they might have some decision-making authorities, right? Depository of those, for example, those laboratories or whatever regional centers, that kind of organizations. So I think that we need to think in a more broad pictures as that state player is key, but currently in a global health governance, state is not the only players. Okay. We should count on other players as well. And state is key, but we still need to count on other organizations, expertise, universities, etc. So I think that this will be what I think that we need to think about. And my job will be almost done here. Only, okay. President actually just come from the state of Taiwan, Taichung, so I think that this is the reason we can bear with her coming a little late. So my presentation will be over here and stop here, and then next presentation will be Tony Kayo. Okay? Okay. Thank you very much.
Excellent presentation. Next, we have Professor Li Chonglin, who will present the paper titled Global Health Law, Legal Reforms in the Post-COVID World. Please join me in welcoming Professor Li with a round of applause.
Apology for my delay. I was here at 12. I used Google Map, and then it directed me to the building up the hill. So yes, so there was a little bit delayed. So nonetheless, I'm really happy today. I want to share my presentation with you today. So the title of my talk is Global Health Law, Legal Reform in the Post-COVID World. So this is the outline of my presentation today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what global health law is and why is the legal reform that's occurring
in Geneva that's going to affect the development of global health law in the future. And because the relevance of global health law is centers of the World Health Organization, which is the global health agency for the world. So we're going to see how the WHO, with its legal power, is quite significant in terms of its law-making power in is negotiating a pandemic agreement at the moment. And then the focus of my presentation today is going to be on the 2005 international health regulations. This is because in May this year, there is a significant overhaul to the 2005 IHR, and with the states agreeing to the package deal, it has significant implications, not only in terms of legal, but also political implications for global health law. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the pandemic agreement in conjunction to the IHR. Then I will conclude my presentation. So global health law stands at critical junctions because the WHO is taking two significant legal reforms, as I mentioned in the introduction. So the first one would be the 2005 IHR, and then the second one is the potential adaptation of a pandemic agreement. And so at the moment, we're not quite sure about whether pandemic agreement will be something that states are going to agree on next May, especially after the election in the US. So it's quite a recent development. So everyone in Geneva is watching and see at the moment. So the three legal reforms added on Geneva reaffirms that there needs to be a rule-based international infectious disease control regime. So this is good news for international law. But we have to remember these negotiations occurs against the background of political discourse. So there's a lot of divide in terms of ideology and also political stances. So this reflects a broader political discontent in terms of multilateralism, but also as a wave of distrust against WHO as the global health agency. So why do we need to talk about global health law? So here is a definition of global health law that is proposed by Professor Ralston and Professor Alan Taylor. So global health law is a specialized field of international law and encompasses the legal norms, processes, and institutions that creates conditions for people throughout the world. So the phrase to attain the highest possible level of physical and mental health is from the preamble of the WHO. So because it's in the preamble, so it is mostly aspiration, so it's not legally enforcing itself. So the bill encompasses, it tries to use law as a mechanism to facilitate health promotive behaviors among states and also amongst the key actors to influence public health. So we see global health law in actions in terms of its tobacco control through the FCTCs and also through other mechanisms known as soft law. So these are not legally binding instruments, but promotes public health in terms of non-communicable diseases and also actions towards climate change as well. So in terms of COVID-19 pandemic, so it has exposed the entrenched power structure with global health governments. So we see there's a rise of populisms and also nationalisms, and also discontent about vaccine nationalism during the pandemic as the countries feeling a little bit distrust towards each other. So my second part of my presentations, I'm going to talk a little bit of WHO because the legal reforms is occurring at the WHO, and it has, as an institute, it has an enormous rule-making power, and it has the power to make anything that's related to the health law. So in terms of WHO's work, it can be divided into 3 broad categories. It can provide information about disease outbreak and trends. So it has a role in terms of international infectious disease control, and it also promotes both communicable and non-communicable diseases. And then it also provides technical support for member states in terms of health policy development, and also in countries training for health personnel. So this is a quotation that's by the former senior health advisor at USAID. He said that WHO was very good ideas going to die. So this is a quotation that was taken about 10 years ago, and it's still something that reflects the sentiment in Geneva. Because when we talk about the WHO, we think it is a normative agency, but in terms of its political stance, it is also a very political agency as well. So before the eruption of COVID-19, these sentiments already exist towards the WHO. So although for global health law scholars and practitioners, we argue that health is a human right issue, but for political scientists, they also think that health is a political decision as well. So this line of sentiments reflects the thinking in Geneva. So when countries negotiate for the amendment to the IHR, and also whether we are going to adopt the pandemic agreement, it is not only a legal choice, but it is also a political decision as well. So that brings to the presentation to the 2005 IHR, which is quite significant for Taiwan. This is because our participation can be derived from Article 3, where there's a universal clause. And in terms of our law, we have internalized some of the structures and also the substance of our IHR as well. So because I have roughly 10 minutes left, so I'm going to talk very quickly about the IHR. So the IHR, it has origins back in the 18th centuries, and it was it has an origin with the International Sanitary Conference back in 1851. So countries recognized very early on that in order to facilitate trade and commerce, there needs to be some sort of international cooperations among states in terms of quarantines, in terms of information sharing between countries, to make sure that the trade and commerce activities can go smoothly. So this has been a reason why some scholars argue that the IHR should be seen as a trade agreement rather than a health agreement, because the aim is to protect trade rather than to protect health. So when the WHO was established, the IHR become something that become a major focus of the WHO. And the IHR has been through several iterations. And with the eruption of COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of criticism for countries and also for practitioners and for civil societies, because our IHR is part of the global health security. It was malfunctioned and it didn't go as well as expected. The notifications system didn't work as well. And with the distribution of vaccines amongst countries, there was a lot of criticisms about the WHO in terms of its handling and also in terms of how it runs the whole vaccine as well. So with countries taking border control measures very early on when WHO declared fake, some of the scholars were very antecedent of the colonial past, where our country used trade as a defense against people from other countries. And with that, the WHA, which is the World Health Assembly, that took place in May this year, was something that should be noted because countries agreed to a package of amendments for the IHR, which is quite significant because the IHR amendments include over 300 proposals for over 100 countries. And the INAB for the IHR was quite efficient, and also the working group for the IHR focused countries to focus on the technical amendments, and they were able to get countries to agree on the Pacific. So some scholars will argue that because the WHO agreed to these IHR amendments, it is something that we should be seen as a real phase in multilateralism. And with a very cautious optimism in that these are agreements for the issues that are not politically contested, but for politically contested issues, there is to prevent a lot of global debate. And one of these issues would be genetic sequencing data for sharing among countries. So in terms of government's innovations, the IHR, the amended IHRs, these are the 6 areas that I have highlighted. So there are a lot more details that we can talk about. But in general, the government's innovations for the IHRs include a new category of a pandemic emergency. So this allows the DG, the Director General of WHO, to declare the pandemic when it's emerging. So this would be more of a political issue rather than a legal issue, because it means that once the DG declares a pandemic, then every country is on the highest alert. So this is based for the previous public health emergency or international concern, and now includes a pandemic emergency. And secondly, the amended IHR includes countries are now required to establish or have a designated IHR authorities in their countries. So this is an innovation in terms of institutionalizing IHR authority. So before the amendment, IHR authority in countries are quite flexible. So when WHO want to know the latest developments, we sometimes have them to provide necessary facilities. And then the amended IHR also established a new financing coordinating mechanisms, and it also introduced an active role of the WHO to support state parties. So this includes technical support from the WHO to member states. And then the last two are creating an intergovernmental implementation committee. So for those who are very familiar with IHR, we know that IHR is a legal instrument, but it doesn't have really any teeth in terms of enforcement power. So for the implementation committee, so in line with the WHO's normative work, it is to be more to add in facilitative and consultative roles only, but so it doesn't, it's not going to be very confrontational with its member states. And lastly, it's going to strengthen collaborations and assistance obligation among states. So how does the amended IHR relate to the pandemic agreement? So the pandemic agreement, before the US elections, people were hoping that in December there could be a
WHA assembly that's ad hoc, but now it seems that it's more likely it's going to be discussed in next May. And then it depends on the diplomatic posting as well. And once the people that are involved in the negotiations will change, we're going to bring a new dynamic to the agreement. So the pandemic agreement, so this is Article 13.3 for the draft pandemic agreement, which is quite interesting from an international law perspective, because there was a lot of criticism against the WHO during the pandemic. So when they were drafting pandemic agreements, they hold a public consultation, online public consultations, so the general public can give their inputs for the WHO pandemic agreement. And because there were a lot of misinformation about the WHO, including its sovereignty. So in the draft agreement, there was a provision about that. The agreement does not infringe on countries' sovereignty. So the core of pandemic agreement in terms of the debates lies with the sharing of samples of the genetic sequences of pathogens. So this is the geopolitical divide amongst countries. So there are still hopes for the pandemic agreement in terms of the negotiation team that has been they have put a new INA meeting to bring the state parties into consensus. So the INA meeting is very different. Before it was led by the Japanese delegate, and now it's being led by a French delegate. And the pandemic agreement and IJOP could be complementary because some of the provisions, such as misinformation, might be dealt with the IJOP, but it could be addressed by the pandemic agreement. So in terms of its legal and international law obligations, it's hopeful that so lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about global health diplomacy, because when we talk about the legal obligations and also the global health legal architectures, there's also a lot has to depend on the global health diplomacy in terms of trying to persuade countries to agree to the agreements, and also to persuade them to notify and also to adhere to the WHO's I have 45 seconds, so my last slide would be if anyone is interested to see what the WHO as a normative agency could do with the global health law reform under WHO governments. This is articles that came out last year and includes Professor Lauren Boston, who is the director of the WHO Collaborative Center, and also John Bucci, who is the former WHO Legal Counsel, and also Benjamin Meyer, who now chairs the Global Health Legal Preparedness Initiative in the US. So I was part of the research. So anyone who's interested, this will be a article. And because my time's up, this brings me to my last slide.
This is the end of the presentations for session 1. Next, we would like to invite Professor Cai Fengwen to provide comments on the 3 papers. Please give her a warm round of applause.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I also have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. Okay, so actually we heard a lot really insightful representations regarding WHO, AICHA, and pandemic. So actually today my role here is now not to say that commentary, just they are trying to link a little bit of their articles and also sharing some of my experience and comments regarding the issues. So yeah, we have now we heard quite a lot regarding the development of those kind of instruments and how political issues actually hypering the progress. So maybe we have to rethink again. So originally, WHO is an agency. They focus on improving the health around the world, rather than the political platforms for this kind of disputes. And then and also the function of AICHA mainly, although we know that there's arguments that AICHA should be a trade agreements rather than the health agreements. But eventually, in the very beginning, initially, that should be a regulations emphasizing improving the health, right? Especially infectious disease control. So I can skip directly since there is already introduction of AICHA, right? So let's say I would like to share with you some of my quick studies previously regarding the real impacts of AICHA itself. So previously in AICHA, after SARS, they have a lot of innovation approaches in the regulation itself, especially focused on from the perspective of infectious disease control, two perspectives that they mainly impact quite a lot in the real settings of control efforts. So one is the early reporting, which means that for the infectious disease control, the most important thing is the early reports. So so that's the possibility for countries to really respond to the pandemic in a real time. So the early reporting is one of the key at that time, especially amended in the law. But how is it? So from the study, actually it shows that yes, countries are much more aware of that. They have to be early report their potential fatigue to WHO. Yes, the time is reduced. However, the transparency of the country matters. So actually, the more transparent countries are actually sharing the information more faster, but not to the WHO, but through media. So then and then also for those kind of non-transparent countries, actually it's more difficult for the media to report the information, and also not mentioning the bureaucracy from the reporting from the country level to the to the WHO. The issue here is that actually after COVID, there are several global experts, especially working in World Bank and WHO, actually asked my comments regarding maybe should we go back to re-emphasize this early reporting obligations again, because only with early reporting there could be a possibility. But I thought that no, it's quite difficult. It's not only political constraint, but also because although AI and technology improved quite a lot within those decades, but there are still some non-transparent countries that's really strong. They can really conceal the informations. So when they ask me that, is there a necessity or potential value for developing an even AI-based system for early reporting? I said, maybe not really useful, because actually tell you the story that actually the first alert regarding COVID to the world is actually from Taiwan. But why? It's not from AI, not from any the other channels, but because of the sensitivity of the professional experts here in Taiwan. So with the experience of SARS, with the strong trained professionals, our experts at the first line actually sense the severity of COVID. So it's human, it's not technology, and also not political influence and informations. So that's the thing. So still in the end, people, professional. And then another important regulations in the AICHA for really infectious disease control is the obligation to strengthen the national capacity in infectious disease control. So the countries, so the AICHA require countries to develop their own minimum capacity for infectious disease control and develop a tool to evaluate their own capacity building, which means that the AICHA require countries to have their own efforts every year to strengthen their own capacity and then report to WHO. So there could be a potential approaches to understand how the world is preparing the pandemic. So generally, without enforcement, yes, country doesn't really care about that. So that there is a delay of reporting. But luckily from the study, because it's all delayed, so after Ebola pandemic, they develop another external review tool, JEE. So also to enforce, they also to encourage and also to try to enhance the efforts to capacity building. But the key point is that this is the study conducted by me and the Rebecca Cates from University of Georgetown. There we find that actually the self-report capacity is quite different from the external review. So from external experts' viewpoints, the preparedness of the country is much lower than they think. So there could be potentially high-rated self. So potentially countries might rate them higher than the real. But then the key point is the key information is that actually good news is that IHR scores, which means that their self-evaluation really predicting the pandemic control efforts. But that's the thing before COVID. It's not the thing after COVID. So that's the reason why after COVID, we talk about pandemic treaty and the other things. This is another thing that heavily discussed that time, the vaccine ecosystem. I was also invited to join these committees for the future vaccine ecosystem discussions. But what I want to share is that if we look through also again the IHR efforts, then potentially those kind of obligations required in IHR should be meaningful for the COVID pandemic treaty. However, the studies, I did not provide the numbers, but then actually in the end, it shows that countries with high capacities actually do respond significantly earlier. But nearly half of them, especially we know that USA or European countries, actually although they are a little bit earlier already to implement the public health measure, still too late. Still too late. So that tells us that the SPA, which means that their own capacity building rating is not really predicting. It's not reflecting the facts. But luckily that after COVID, the following study shows that the countries also know that they are highly rated themselves. So they reasonably reduce a little bit their own self-evaluations. So what this tells us, IHR do have some impact. They do. But only in those kind of method, which means it's within the country effort only. It's not the collaborating efforts that they could potentially show. So now what we have to consider is in the future. So again, we are talking about the pandemic treaty in the future right here. So allow me to share some of my experience with you that actually when we talk about the IMBs of the pandemic treaty, I personally and TMU, the university with me, was nominated to be an expert in IMBs. So our names were sent to their WHO meetings, executive meeting. But I guess you can guess a little bit what happens later, right? After the second meeting, it's drop off. And then that's echoing the arguments of Professor Yang regarding those kind of transparency and meaningful participations. So it's a little bit pity that even it's a academic participation, there's still a political boundary without any explanations. And also, actually, in this June, I was joining the conference of global health security in Australia and served as a scientific committee member. There are lots of pandemic treaty negotiators there sharing that experience. Yes, legally speaking, like Professor Yang already mentioned, it should be that meaningful and should be equity, transparency, and all the things. But the facts already pointed out by the other speakers that political concern is the thing. And so even more important is that the one who is in the negotiation effort and the meetings, they are not really negotiating. Actually, they are trying to find an excuse not to participating. That's the reality stuff. And also but then there's again, I would like to echo that there's still a hope. Why? Because the future and also the current progress is talk about something more solid and potentially working. So I guess we will hear about this virus and the sharing, pathogen sharing, and so on, which already there with PIP framework already. But it's really difficult, even though the PIP framework is already there, it's never been executed yet. But then there's still hope. Why I say that? Because there is really need for the response measures for pandemic, future pandemic. So in the meetings, in the conference meeting, actually there are quite a lot of private entities, and also the discussion and the effort and the pushing forward discussion with the legal framework for public-private partnership for public health measure is more focused even now. But I would like to echo those kind of trend here currently in the global health community. I realized that this is a video coding, so I don't want to show. What I want to say is that actually one of the things for echoing the presenters regarding Taiwan's participation, the thing I covered, but I would like to share with you is that actually yesterday I received the invitation for review from the Journal of WHO Bulletin. This is my several times I received the invitation. The problem is, usually if you do have the experience to communicate with scientific journal, you know that. Usually nowadays everybody uses electronic systems, right? So agree or disagree to review as an expert. But that's really interesting strategy of WHO to send those kind of invitation email to me. Usually they will send from really emails by either editors or by whomever. So by these approaches, it avoids me not to, so it prevents me to try to be in the position that I have the difficulty to choose my nationality in the system. So then as a researcher, I have two choices. One, decline because it's unrespectful. Right? The other choices for me is to participate in a meaningful way, since it might be really potential benefit to the whole world, because I help to review those kind of articles. So with that, after some concerns, I do agree. But then that leads to my final conclusions regarding what my viewpoints regarding the future. First of all, regional approach. I have to echo that. Because with this COVID-19 experience, we realized that actually the regional approach is not, the presenter already mentioning why the efforts of regional collaboration is more and more important and possible now. The second part is that actually the regional approach is not especially only for pandemic preparedness, but also because the current pandemic preparedness is not only requiring the effort from political concern, but also the public health measure concern, for example, vaccine development, for example, the supply chains of those kind of real products. So information sharing and also the public health measure development is extremely important, and also even more important in the regional capacity perspective. So that's also one of the sharing is also that previously that after COVID, what I received and facilitating is the global collaborations of the research on the sustainability and resilience in the health system. That means that every country now focus more on their own national capacity regarding how to respond to that, but also from the perspective of this pandemic preparedness effort, they also focus quite a lot on their own development of technology, and also because everybody knows that those kind of development cannot be only rely on domestic effort. So most of their own concern also considering how to collaborate globally for developing rapidly regarding those kind of public health measures. So I have to echoing the arguments that the regional approach especially focus on the product themselves, especially creating a legal reform for those kind of related supply chain might be a potential approaches to go, since it's much more solid and it's much more, I won't say public health and targeted, but it could be helpful. It could be helpful and meaningful participations. And secondly is the meaningful contribution might be the current approaches we can try academically, and then also global efforts. There are still some work that we can do. And again, I would like to agree again that the like-minded country, which means a value-based alliance for health. Okay, that's my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tsai, for your commentary. Now we invite Professor Lin Taiyu to host the Q&A section.
So, still has some time. I'd like to open the floor and to Q&A part. Any questions or comments or this panel? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for those talks. It was very interesting to see the overview of the some of the concerns in this region. I noticed in the thread that there's a lot of support for regionalism. You know, using regional mechanisms. And I noted from Professor Chikuma's talk, ASEAN was mentioned. I found that very interesting. And I guess I'm just curious from the speakers. You know, is ASEAN seen as one of the more promising regional entities for maybe geopolitical reasons to engage in this regionalism approach, or are there other regional bodies that are more fruitful? I mean, I work in an ASEAN country in Singapore, and there has been a lot of effort to strengthen and improve ASEAN governance cooperation. Although I don't know if there are other geopolitical concerns with trying to integrate the ASEAN versus other regional entities. So I don't know who wants to address.
We just collect some questions. One by one. Collect some questions because of our time.
Are you okay to respond?
Sure.
Thank you for your question. As you pointed out, that Asia is a variety of diversity in terms of political system or values, so it is quite difficult to have some comprehensive framework vision. And actually, there is no regional cooperative framework that covers the entire region. But I think that for now, like South Korea and some cooperation between South Korea and Southeast Asian countries, and Japan and the Southeast Asian countries. But I think that accumulation of such efforts lead to strengthen the Asia in the future. So, that's my point.
Thank you for the fascinating presentation. So I think my question goes to Professor Yang. So I think the idea of referring to principle of transparency or accountability in order to create a task for the non-state actor to participate in the pandemic agreement is, I think it's reasonable and it's convincing. But I also echo the concern, or not really a concern, but the experience shared by Professor Taiwan. From your perspective, to what extent the participation is enough to meet the principle of transparency? Is the individual base enough, or from your perspective, do you think that it is necessary, or it will be more ideal to include a non-state actor like Taiwan to have a special status in order to meet the principle or the element of the transparency, or make the pandemic agreement to be more accountable?
I have a quick response. I think that this is a very difficult question. I think that we just find a way to be able to have the possibility that using the language involved in the agreement, so that can accommodate as much people as possible, or at least that us Taiwan, that we can send either individual experts into the proceeding. That would be, I think, is enough for us. But the ultimate goal will be able to sit, as other members equally in the room. But I think that this is too difficult to achieve in the short run. But at least I think that we have to make sure that if there is the language can be accommodated, that kind of thing. This is the starting point for the research. But I find that the different versions have different wordings as well. So originally the wording will be more flexible, such as they will use partners involved in the language in the terms. And partners can have a lot of meanings, right? So that will be more flexible for us to utilize. But later I find that they delete terms. Okay, they use organizations, international organizations that has been associated with WHO. So that will close the door a little bit. So I think that this is what I think that I try to do. But there might be another way to do that. Okay, so for example, we can use the private connections or whatever, just like academic connections. But it is not the official way. So I think that is what I try to do the response to.
Chairman Xiao, would you like to
Sure.
comment or
Have
raise
a
any
comment?
questions? Yeah, give us some comment.
Because I already retired more than 10 years. And after these 10 years, it's rare for me to participate in this field. But I would like to say why I come to this conference this afternoon. I noticed the agreement is ongoing or going to be discussed. But I'm concerned from the way that WHO now post-COVID, they are not only concerned about the disease, the public health preventions, they're also concerned about the national regulatory agencies. Yeah, because not only for the vaccines, but also for the pharmaceuticals, the treatment products. So they would like to, accreditate, each country's national regulatory agency. Previously, they only concerned about those countries who provide vaccines. Okay, so they will inspect their national regulatory agency. It will now extend to all the member states agency. So I just wonder, from IHR, because I involved IHR 10 years ago, I just wonder whether we can continue, under the framework of IHR, then can extend to this, this agreement. The point is, how about the so-called universal participation application? IHR, actually the most important wording is the universal application. So Taiwan could be part of, right? So this is very important. And secondly, whether, talking about if it's work, under this phase, then we have the position, to participate, to discuss, about, their accreditation for the national regulatory agency. That is very important. That's my opinion. And secondly, I noticed from our, vaccine company that previously it's difficult for our vaccine company to provide vaccine, even we want to provide vaccine to WHO, or even it's more difficult to get the virus, the important material when the pandemic happened. But now WHO just escaped all the barrier. They agree, to provide, if it is necessary in some specific situation, they can provide those material directly to our vaccine company. We can skip, originally we need, for example, to get this from US, US CDC collaboration laboratory, something like this indirectly. But now it's already skip this step and directly approach to our vaccine company. This is a good information. If you have the chance to look into 就是国光影你如果可以去看他公司的 information， they are very glad to announce this to the public. This is recently from pharmaceutical side I noticed this part.
I guess I have, I would like to add in Dr. Schaefer. So more hard science efforts or this kind of response efforts somehow can penetrate the political concerns. But now I have a question for Professor Lee, especially that like what you mentioned, there are already scholars arguing that actually health is a political decision. Actually, it's true, especially in the global level, even within the domestic level, like we are now discussing the national health insurance issues. But then, because that's a value-based approach, even though there's a debate between human rights approaches, I would like to ask, from your observations, those kind of concerns or those kind of consensus, is that elaborated to the scientists, or still the ideas of the legal experts only? Because actually that will heavily shifting the negotiation process, actually.
Thank you so much, Professor Chai, for that wonderful questions. So I didn't have the chance to elaborate in my presentation. So in terms of talking about health as a political issue, that's certainly that we are seeing at the international level. And as someone who studied global health, so I have to say that for the pandemic agreement, so when the pandemic agreement was drafted, when it was at the stage of zero draft, so it was at the stage where the draft hasn't been shared with member states yet. The WHO Legal Council did approach the research team that I work with, so they wanted to embed the human rights language into the zero draft. And so they did put a paragraph into the pandemic agreement, but that was later taken out. And because human rights is not something that's very popular amongst countries. But having said that, I have to say, because Professor has mentioned about regionalism and whether it will went forward as we see a lot of discontent against multilateralism. It's quite interesting in the sense of the receiving of the supply chains. So I would say human rights, although it might be very difficult to talk about human rights at the international level, especially when the country are trying to tie genetic sequence sharing, the data sharing with information sharing, as well to leverage the decisions. But at the national level and the regional levels, there's still space for us to talk about human rights. Because when you talk about human rights, you are talking about how the government should be held responsible and also accountable. And that is the level that is most realistic to the whole government, because you have the whole ecosystems in place. And we know that the WHO, even though it's a normative agency, it's very difficult for countries to agree to give WHO enforcement power. So this is one of the reasons why human rights is so difficult to reinforce at the international level. But at the domestic level, we still can talk about human rights either through the constitutional law or through other domestic laws. So I hope that answers my question. Thank you very much. Although we may have more to discuss, however, because of our limits, I have to close the session. And thank you very much for your participation. And that's, can I invite our audience to give a round of applause for Thank you very much.
conference. The topic is Operation and Trade-Related Issues of WHO Pandemic Treaty Negotiation, featuring 3 papers. We are honored to have Dr. Wu Jianhui, Research Fellow at the Institute of European and American Studies, Academia Sinica, serve as the chairperson. The discussants for this session are Associate Professor Zhang Zhaotian from Graduate Institute of National Development, National Taiwan University, and Associate Professor Li Bohan from Global Health Program, National Taiwan University. The speakers are Assistant Professor General Owen Schaefer from Center for Biomedical Ethics, Yongle Lee School of Medicine, National University of Singapore. Assistant Professor Wu Xian from Program on Law and Negotiation for Global Trade, National Taipei University of Business, and Assistant Professor Luo Maowei from National Taiwan University College of Law. Now, let us welcome Chairperson Wu Jianhui to deliver the opening remarks for this session.
Professor Yes, yeah, it's my great pleasure to be here. And I learned when I start my trade law, and I follow one seminar with Dominic, long time ago with Lucia, and I participated in the conference by this institute for several years. And today is I'm great to be here, and we have 3 distinguished scholars and 2 commentators, and 3 of them have some connections with me personally, either or research fields. And today we would have Owen Schaefer, and I noticed his bachelor degree is in Princeton, which is all grammar and genius fields. And we also have Wu Xian, who defended his PhD at Graduate Institute, and with Yost, one of the most famous trade lawyers, and also Professor Lo, who just defended his PhD in Stanford. And without further ado, and I would like to invite Owen to make his presentation.
For your remarks. We now begin the first paper presentation of session 2. The speaker is Assistant Professor Jerome Owen Schaefer, presenting the paper titled An Ethical Defense of the Pathogen Effects and Benefit Sharing System in the Accord. Please give him a warm round of applause.
Thanks very much for the invitation and for having me at this very interesting and illuminating conference. So I'll be talking about a system that's already been alluded to in several presentations, and I think it is a very important aspect of the Accord, or the current draft of the Accord. Indeed, as I'm going to give an ethical defense, my background is in ethics rather than in law, but I think this is one of the best shots we have at promoting justice and equity in the Pandemic Accord. So I think actually there's a very strong reason to support and try to ensure that this ends up in the final draft, though that is a big question mark. Indeed, we've seen why that the Accord has been delayed, and dispute over PABs is one of the barriers. It is actually one of the most highly disputed provisions in the Accord, and I think it should become apparent why it's not already. Just as a matter of disclosure, I am a member of the WHO Ethics Outbreak and Emergency Working Group. Although I was not involved in any direct way in the drafting of the Accord, I will be ethically defending a key aspect of it. Okay, so I think we all are aware of one of the problems motivating some of the aspects of the Pandemic Accord, and the issue of inequity that we saw in COVID-19. This is one of many different visualizations of the vaccine inequity that was apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see that as the pandemic progressed, right, high-income nations were very quickly able to secure vaccines that almost immediately after they were developed. But as the income level goes down, the ability to secure efficacious and safe vaccines similarly went down. The ability to pay, ability to secure those vaccines was the primary determinant of ability to vaccinate one's population very quickly. And you'll see this is just a heat map of relevant dosage later from 2023 of vaccination. around the world. And the darker the color, the higher rate of at least one dose vaccination. Again, representing the inequities across the globe concerning vaccine coverage. So this is, I think, self-evidently a problem. The idea being that this particular heat map does not reflect the heat, is not reflecting what are the countries that had the greatest mortality rates necessarily for COVID-19, but rather the areas that were most able to secure those vaccines based on their own purchasing power and infrastructure. Okay, now we all, I think, are aware that there were mechanisms put in place during COVID-19 to attempt early on, very early on in 2020, to attempt to prevent such vaccine inequity. COVAX was the major international consortium that was set up early in 2020 to try to promote vaccine and other pandemic response equity. And the way it was envisaged was very interesting. It was seen as a hub. The idea was that countries would make use of COVAX as a clearinghouse for vaccines. Right? So countries would contribute supply, and then they would receive out of it. And it'd be a way of centralizing distribution and ensuring equitable access. But as soon as the vaccines were developed very early in the pandemic in 2020, high-income countries very quickly realized that relying on COVAX was not in their national interest. Okay? They could secure vaccine for their own population if they could afford it much more quickly through bilateral arrangements. Right? So it's a direct arrangement with manufacturers, with pharmaceutical companies to secure supply even before that supply was developed. So the countries purchased vaccine supply even before those vaccines were approved. Right? So they paid money up front. It turned out to be a very good investment because they could get vaccines first in the queue. And COVAX essentially had to wait. COVAX's ability to secure supply was limited by its own funding, by its inability to obtain those bilateral agreements early on. So we found vaccine nationalism, right, was the ultimate determinant of ability to secure vaccines. Vaccine nationalism being the idea of promoting one's own country's access to vaccines and other pandemic countermeasures, in contrast with vaccine cosmopolitanism, right, which would be the more global, equitable approach to try to ensure that vaccines and other countermeasures are distributed according to need, rather than ability to pay. Okay, so that is the background. Now let's turn to the question of what is the pathogen access and benefit sharing system found in the Accord. And just as a note, there's an earlier mentioned by Professor Yang that, look, this pandemic Accord keeps changing. This particular presentation will be based on the April 2024 draft of the Accord. There is a new draft that many of you will be aware of. I didn't update this in light of that new draft. It's been released at least by Health Policy Watch. You can find it online. The PAB's content though is mostly the same, so I think the new update won't make too much of a difference. It does show that they still have not cracked this nut of exactly how to finalize PABs. But anyway, the broad contours, interestingly, have been relatively consistent throughout the different drafts. So despite other things like human rights provisions being cut out, PABs has remained across drafts. I think that's a good sign for global equity. Okay, PABs is interesting because it does have two main functions. Try to advance global equity in the Accord. Okay, so one is to ensure the rapid and systematic and timely sharing of PABs, pathogen access and benefit sharing material, that is both physical materials such as samples as well as data related to those samples for pathogens of pandemic potential. And then inter alia, obtain public health risk assessment from that. But then the second component is to have a timely, effective, and predictable and equitable access to those products. Both non-monetary and non-monetary, arising from such sharing. Okay? So the idea is not just to facilitate the sharing of samples and data to promote development of interventions and countermeasures like vaccines, but also to promote the equitable sharing. This is together. It's not necessarily a novel mechanism. There are other mechanisms that predate this that have attempted the same thing, and this was built on some of those prior mechanisms. And there are pluses and minuses to linking these two things together. There's some criticism in the literature of linking them together. But I think for some pragmatic reasons we'll get into, there is some good reason to link these two things together. Okay. So in the actual Accord draft text, there is some meat on the bones. There's a lot of aspirational, very vague statements about, well, you should support sharing and support equity, and that's all well and good, but you want to have very specific provisions to bind countries in a legal instrument like this. And actually PABs has that. So beyond just talking about equitable sharing, there is a quota system, a tie. Right, that the PAB system will create an obligation of relevant parties to donate essentially 10 plus 10. 10% of pandemic products to the WHO, essentially at free, and then plus another 10% on top of that at a very affordable rate. So 10% free, 10% at an affordable rate. Total 20% obligated and donated to the WHO, and then the WHO in turn would distribute that equitably based on principles of need to countries around the world. And that's a specific number here. And that's something that if countries did sign on to this accord, would potentially bind them. So I'll talk about exactly how we might enforce this in a minute. Okay, so this is reflective, I think, of the key ethical principles of the accord. We've heard a bit about ethical principles. Actually, it is a little unique that there are explicit ethical principles in this document. Not every legal instrument has these ethical principles. And ethicists was very excited to see these principles articulated, and I've had some commentaries on how to fill out these principles. But notably, equity. Equity is a key explicit principle of the accord, in addition to solidarity. Right? And equity and solidarity are clearly two of the desiderata of a system of access and benefit sharing. Equitable sharing of those benefits in line with the idea of solidarity of countries, not just looking after, number one, after themselves, but looking in solidarity with other countries as well. Right? So trying to push back against the nationalist, the purely nationalist approaches to at least somewhat, some degree of a global cosmopolitan, global solidaristic framework for access and benefit sharing. But, so as a caveat, not a full unbridled cosmopolitan document. There's also the recognition that sovereign states have the right to adopt legal legislation and implement legislation within their jurisdiction. I think beyond the strict legal language of this, there is a general recognition that countries do have obligations towards their own citizens in a pandemic. And just to underline that, from an ethical perspective, it's not nationalism is inherently a bad thing. I don't want to say, oh, cosmopolitanism is great, nationalism, oh, that's horrible. There is an ethical justification for nationalism, including a degree of vaccine nationalism. Okay? The idea here is that there are some ethical obligations, normative obligations countries have towards their own citizens, partly based on associative ties. It's the idea that we have certain ties with our co-citizens, with our fellow citizens, that don't necessarily apply as strongly to foreign entities. Right? These associative ties can emerge over time. They can emerge as a result of cooperative enterprise, as well as a result of certain institutional arrangements. There's also the pragmatic argument that, look, to realize human rights, we don't have a world government. The derogation of human rights to national entities has been the way human rights have typically been enforced in the globe to date. So to the extent that countries are going to be promoting human rights globally, they have the most efficacious ability to do so via domestic law. Okay? And so pragmatically speaking, we're trying to promote human rights in terms of health. Right? Sovereign entities are the most direct entities that can promote that. Finally, there is an idea of reciprocity. Right? To the extent that individuals, they pay taxes, they're subject to the laws of their governments. Those governments have direct obligations to those citizens that are paying taxes, that are subject to their laws, to look after their rights and welfare. Okay, so these are normative groundings. These are not to be quickly dismissed, but they're also in competition or in tension with cosmopolitan duties. And as an ethicist, we shouldn't forget that there are competing cosmopolitan obligations. And so one of these is just based on the fundamental equality of human beings, regardless of nationality. This is a foundational principle of the human rights international regime. And I think that that idea that our needs, our rights are relevant, ethically relevant, and generate obligations regardless of nationality must be kept in mind when we think about principles of equity and solidarity. There's also ideas of impartiality, the idea that it's a matter of a certain form of discrimination to say, well, certain people's interests matter more depending on their country of origin or nationality. And finally, from a more consequentialist perspective, in terms of trying to minimize suffering, maximize well-being, that only really makes sense at a global scale. There's no real coherent, national consequentialism where only the interests of one's country matter consequentially. We need to think globally in terms of promoting well-being. Right? And if we're looking at advocating health, that should apply regardless of borders. So we have then our competing ethical considerations. Right? There are arguments on, so to speak, both sides. And what that means is that an appropriate ethically defensible regime should reflect this. You can't go fully into a cosmopolitan framework. That would not be relevantly respectful of acceptable national priority. But you also can't go fully into a nationalistic framework because that would abrogate our obligations towards the global community, grounded in human rights and broader human interests. Okay, and I think that the PAB system that I just mentioned does reflect this need to compromise and balance these different competing ethical considerations. Right? So we have this 10 plus 10 notion that essentially can be seen as a tie. There was some articles early on in the COVID-19 pandemic that put forward this idea that you should set aside a share of your vaccine and other countermeasure production for the sake of global need. And the idea, why does this advance equity? Well, that means that, yeah, you're still giving most of your supply domestically, right? Okay, it's still 80% that's earmarked domestically. So still you have a nationalist priority, right? Substantial nationalist priority, but it's not absolute. Puts a limit on that. Puts a numerical limit on that. And so I think that recognition of a balance is ethically appropriate. Now there's going to be a question, well, wait, hold on, 20%, it could be more than that, and it could. But we need to be, to some extent, realistic as well about what is achievable at the global stage. It was mentioned that health is political. That is absolutely correct. And you know, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to look at what is actually going to be a relevant, appropriate standard that is enough signatories are going to be able to sign on board to make this treaty globally viable. Okay, so in that regard, you need to have some degree of high-income country buy-in. Right? So if only LMICs end up signing the resultant accord, it probably won't have a very good effect. That you will have the same situation as COVAX, right? Where you had COVAX, yes, for LMICs were very much willing to support and promote COVAX. High-income countries look out for themselves. And if you have a pandemic accord that doesn't have that buy-in, it's likely not going to have the results that you need. So how close to the ideal can we get? There's a further question, though, of enforcement. Okay, and in the remaining time, I want to spend a bit of time on how exactly we're going to make sure that that tie, that 10 plus 10 limit, is actually put in place. Note, this is the 2024 language. They basically punted on this. Earlier versions had put in an explicit enforcement system that I'll return to that I actually think still has lots to be said for it. But they basically said that this is going to be negotiated in the future. And again, it's very possible this is the sticking point that we never resolve. But I think we need to nevertheless promote attempts to resolve enforcement of patents. Okay, so here's two models. Here's two models that could be used. So one is direct enforcement. Right? Parties are signing this pandemic accord, and you could simply say, as a matter of a signatory's obligations, says that these countries domestically will ensure that, to the extent that the country has that power when it makes orders for vaccines or other products, that they earmark this 10 plus 10%, right? This would be unconditional. This would be pretty straightforward. This is the direct way of instantiating those ethical values that I talked about. Countries, by rights, should be willing to do this if they are, ethically upright. But there is a big practical danger here, because if you try to have direct enforcement, this is going to mean that non-signatories will not be bound by this 10 plus 10. So why is this important? Well, we talked a bit about the non-signatory role of countries like Taiwan, and that that might be seen as a problem for entities that want to have more involvement. But it's a bigger problem, I think, for the United States. So as we all know from the US election, with the incoming administration, there will be a substantial hostility towards international arrangements like this. Trump, as we know from his first administration, was very much anti-globalist. He withdrew and suspended various treaties and international arrangements. My own view is that it is extremely unlikely that the United States will sign the pandemic accord under any conditions, no matter whether the PABS is present or not. Most likely that the US is not going to be willing to sign on to this instrument. And as such, the question has been raised, okay, so if you rely on signatory power of enforcement, then countries like the United States will simply be left out. And the United States was a major producer of vaccines during the pandemic, and probably will continue to be. And so we would be left out, a major player in that regard. So here's the second mechanism of arrangement. This is a mechanism that appeared in earlier drafts of the pandemic accord, also in the zero draft. But it's kind of become, in the latest drafts, it's not quite as explicit. I think the latest draft has a bracket or parenthetical suggesting this would be an option, but for various reasons it's not as strongly put forward anymore. But this is the idea that I found quite clever, and it is again based on prior arrangements in tying receipt of pathogen data to distribution. The idea is, well, if you want access to patents, if a country wants to get access to those pathogens and that data, right? As a matter of signing an arrangement, you have to sign an arrangement that says, by receiving these samples and this data, we agree that when we produce such pathogen response materials, such as vaccines or countermeasures, we will set aside this 10 plus 10%. Okay? What's nice about that is that a country or entity might not be a signatory to PABs. It might not have signed the treaty, but if it wants access to PABs material, it will have to agree to that 10 plus 10 arrangement. And in a global pandemic, where the origin of the relevant pathogen is likely not to be in necessarily countries like the United States, the United States might be susceptible to such a pandemic. It's in the country's interest to sign that agreement to get access to the pathogen data and samples to develop countermeasures quickly. Right? So it's a bit of a gambit, but it is a way of trying to expand the scope of justice without requiring countries like the United States, which might be reluctant to sign on these principles, to nevertheless enforce those principles of justice on them. But I do want to note there is some criticism in the literature of this approach. There's a limited literature on this, but there is a link here to one recent critique of PABs based on experience of similar systems in the past which have struggled in regards to enforcement. Because what you're doing is you're making equity contingent on the use of those samples, okay? Which overemphasizes the principle of reciprocity, which I don't think is really central to pandemic principles. We talk about why some people have argued that reciprocity is, but I think we need to focus more on principles of equity and solidarity. And so it's not contingent. It's not that, oh, you get to receive, it shouldn't be that you get to receive access to countermeasures because you contributed something. It's not the model. And arguably, this model relies on reciprocity too much. Furthermore, there's a danger there that you could undermine progress towards countermeasure development. Because if you start tying access to paths to countermeasure, you might find countries withdrawing from sharing arrangements. And then you find the next pandemic perhaps you won't have as quick a development of vaccines or other countermeasures. So that is a pragmatic danger. And there's a question of whether that is worth it, whether it's worth it to risk to some degree speed of data sharing and sample sharing for the sake of promoting global equity. I think that question is one that needs to be resolved. But ultimately, it is going to be a matter of international negotiations. It is a real policy question. I think we need to recognize that. So from an ethics, so I guess then the question is, how should we look at this from, I'm an ethics perspective. I think one thing is to recognize that PABs is an ethically robust component of the Accord. I think it is worth defending, even though it does have flaws and it does have its critics. That it does reflect those ethical principles, and it does reflect an appropriate balance of principles. But in this real negotiation, the role of ethicists should be at least to provide a voice, even as observers, even if those of us like myself that are not involved in the negotiations, to provide some degree of support for these efforts, to provide some degree of moral support for these efforts. To whatever extent that might help things at the sidelines. But I do hope that as these negotiations continue, that we continue to be able to promote the principles of justice through the PABs system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Schaefer, for your thought-provoking presentation. The next paper presentation is by Assistant Professor Wu Xian, titled Missed Opportunity Under the New Framework, Exploring Untapped Potentials Under the Dispute Settlement Mechanism of the WHO Pandemic Agreement. Let us welcome Professor Wu with a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Professor Schaefer. Very energetic presentation, and I hope I can achieve the same level of energy with my presentation as well. I hope. Okay. All right, so today I wanted to talk about the dispute settlement in the current draft of the WHO Pandemic Agreement. So it's specifically Article 25, and of course the reason for this title I'll explain in my first part of my presentation, but then I'll use this as a way of presenting my current level of research that looks into other possible alternative mechanisms that might be useful for the consideration of developing a more useful, maybe develop a new kind of dispute settlement mechanism that will be useful in resolving some of the outstanding issues that we can observe in international health law, especially in light of our recent experience of COVID-19. So this will be the structure of my presentation today. So let's first start with a little introduction on this rather trivial provision in the WHO pandemic agreement. So it's currently in the newest version I can find, which is on September 19, 2004. This is still listed in Article 25, and this is the current text, as you can see on it now. Of course, I'll not bother you reading out this text. I will break this down as a background for your understanding of why I want to engage this topic. Now, basically, this is a design that has two sets of dismissal mechanisms. First of all, it relies on negotiation, the classical diplomatic approach, as the means of resolving dispute. But in addition to that, but before we, sorry, a bit of a slip out here. So currently, update on the current progress. This text you see on Article 25 in September is actually a continuation of the text that we already see in the 77th World Health Assembly, which is in May 27, 2004. So this was already in the annexes of that of the document then, and basically does not change until now. And as you can see from what I have here is the current text, basically this part, which is marked in green, which it says that the negotiators already have initial agreement on this text. So that's why I would take a safe guess to say that unless there's some really, really extraordinary situation going on, this text will not change. Maybe not at all, but maybe some changes to some of the part of the wordings. So basically what this text enshrines is a two-step mechanism. First, settlement through diplomatic channels, and then use arbitration as a kind of official option. Now basically the good office's mediation conciliation mechanisms are incorporated with the diplomatic process, while the arbitration one, which interestingly makes clear that it will rely mainly depending on the PCA arbitration rule of 2012, or any subsequent rules change that was subject to change afterwards, though for arbitration it must be based on consent in writing. So basically from this kind of structure, it indicates, at least in my view, that first of all, it actually still designates the classical diplomatic means of negotiation as the first and also main mechanism for dispute settlement. Now, in its design, when it says it talks about arbitration, it does put negotiation as some kind of a precondition. But only when you can engage arbitration when there is a failure to negotiate an outcome. So in this vein, arbitration does have some preconditions. It is not expected to be like the first instance of resolving a dispute between the contracting parties under the agreement. Now, in this respect, how arbitration fares in this whole process will depend on their practice, whether the contracting parties are willing to utilize arbitration as an important means of dispute resolution. But I must say, at least based on my current level of understanding and based on my observation of what happened in COVID-19, I would be a bit reserved on the usefulness of arbitration in the sense that COVID-19 seems to lead to some kind of an environment where the states in this world are more willing to engage in negotiation and cooperation that is based on some kind of self-interest rather than saying that they are operating because there is some kind of legal obligation to do so. And whether states in this world are willing to take up some kind of a binding decision through an arbitrator, third-party neutral arbitrator, it remains to be seen. I mean, I'm not really optimistic about this, but at least the good thing here is that the negotiators are willing to use arbitration as an option. Now, do you know that in earlier text, it only mentioned negotiation, arbitration was added later. Right. So at least the good news is we have an option, and now what we're not certain is how this will be used. All right. Now, I mentioned that, as you can see, in September, initially there's an agreement between the negotiators on this text. Now, unfortunately, I do not have privy to a lot of the details of what went of the records. I do not have close contact with negotiators that know what's going on. So here I will take that educated guess here. It's like the case that Article 25 was not envisaged to be something that's very, very intended to be innovative. What they wanted to do is that they want to settle down on what diplomats consider to be the most familiar game available. And in this respect, they don't want to use they don't want Article 25 to become a provision which will become a sticking point to the whole pandemic agreement negotiation. They would like to focus more on the substantive provisions, settling down those terms, and leave Article 25 is something that's familiar to everyone, and therefore there will be no disagreements, no problems arising out of that. So you can say that in this respect, it is intended to be be a conservative design. There is no intention to include what kind of judicial, semi-judicial, or non-judicial innovative approaches. All right, but with arbitration as an option if the parties so choose. Now, what this tells me though is that, of course, it means that negotiation will be smooth on this front. But on the other hand, if there's any outstanding issues in terms of the traditional approaches, it will also remain. You are actively choosing to not resolve these issues because there's other more important issues to fry. So this brings you to my main problem regarding this design, which is about time. Now, if we look back to COVID-19, indeed, there is always a lot of difficulties in terms of coordinating resources at the early stage. And when it comes to trying to resolve issues, outstanding issues through one negotiation, we can also observe a lot of difficulties. And also, amongst one of those difficulties is the issue of time, whether it's possible to use diplomatic negotiation to secure a quick outcome that will provide a useful solution to whatever is blocking efforts of curbing COVID-19. Now, I would like to cite one example that I know of because I'm more into a trade law expert rather than health law. But a good example here you can see about time waste is the WTO negotiation on suspending certain provisions of the TRIPS agreement in order to facilitate the fight against COVID-19. It took more than 2 years in the negotiation process. Yes, there is an outcome, and the WTO Director General wanted to make this as a great achievement, but do note that in addition to the waste of time, of course, there's also a limitation in terms of scope. It focuses only on patent. It does not deal with other fields such as industrial design, copyright, etc. And what that actually led to is that there is some kind of contribution in terms of facilitating production and distribution of vaccines somehow. But when it comes to like ventilators and other necessary medical products, there is a shortfall because a lot of them are not protected through patent, or that patent is a really key issue when it comes to these supplies. So yeah, 2 years. And within those 2 years, you have COVID-19 going around in this world. So, and furthermore, what gives me not that good of an enthusiasm to negotiations is the fact that from COVID-19, and especially observing recent politics, we can also observe that indeed when it comes to international coordinated efforts, there is always the problem of how governments should react to internal pressure. Now, I won't use the word nationalism here because I'm focusing on a specific type of pressure, which is that even though governments, through the experts, might know that certain things must be done through global cooperation in order to prevent or fight against pandemics, sometimes the internal pressures, the call for certain priorities over others, would prevent governments from engaging in such a coordination effort. It is not an option for these governments because if they do so, it might risk the current, will risk the current governments in power. The governments will not be able to survive the next election or whatever is the power struggle that is faces. Now, this is a kind of reality that showed itself, especially in COVID-19. Right. So, in this respect, negotiation was never a means of dispute settlement that is intended to be quick. And furthermore, with the current political realities, it actually puts more into question of how much states are willing to resolve outstanding issues through negotiation. That's why I was on the pointed this out as one of the main issues in terms of the design of dispute settlement. And now, of course, since it's unlikely the case that we will look at some kind of big changes to Article 25, nevertheless, we have always the opportunity as scholars to think about possible alternatives. And using this conference, I would like to propose maybe another alternative means which can serve as a conceptual starting point for some kind of new mechanism. I would like to refer to what we see in private dispute settlement dispute boards. Now, dispute board, what is this? Dispute board is a kind of, it's not arbitration, it's a kind of unique set of dispute settlement mechanisms that mainly see use in large construction projects, especially if it involves international contractors. Now, why is this the case? First of all, let me explain why dispute board appeared specifically in construction projects. But first of all, when it comes to construction projects, it involves a lot of contractor relationship, it involves a lot of engineer and technical issues. And in that respect, the technicality of these large construction projects means that any dispute, first of all, would lead to serious costs and time delay. Right? If you are someone who wants to earn money through these kind of projects, this is not what we want to see. And also because of that same problem of technicality, it actually means that a traditional court is not a palatable option when it comes to dispute settlement because you do not know whether the judges presiding on the dispute is able to handle those technicalities. Some might, but not all of them. All right. Furthermore, when it comes to construction projects, it always involves, for the interest of all sides, long-term relationships. You want the steady supply of the materials you need. You want to have a stable relationship that would allow the smooth running of the project. And finally, one unique aspect about a construction project is that when there's a dispute, the owner of the project usually will withhold the flow of cash to the contractors. And therefore, for the contractors, there's also a high interest for them to resolve disputes quickly. All right. So usually a dispute board is consists of a standing body, some ad hocs, but mainly standing body. Now the reason for this is because a standing body is able to constantly work with parties, so they would call in experts to preside in these bodies, and they would familiarize themselves with the projects, the details, and the contractors and the owners. Right? And because of their close interaction with the parties, they are able to provide expert views on resolving disputes. And furthermore, if only a standing body can participate in dispute settlement through dispute avoidance, in the sense that they can issue early warnings of possible disputes if they see something is wrong. Now, of course, for these boards, there are 3 experts. They can be more, but they can be less. Right. Now, these experts are mainly engineering and construction experts, but they can also include lawyers if needed. And these boards, dispute boards, can hold site visits and hold meetings with the parties. Right. So essentially, why parties are willing to follow, for example, suggestions or reports issued by the dispute board is because of their close working relationship with the parties, familiarity with the project, as well as the credibilities that these experts have with the parties to this construction project. Now, this is not arbitration. This is pre-dispute settlement mechanism for dispute avoidance, or at least some kind of an early means of dispute settlement. All right, so it can be issue binding rulings or non-binding recommendations. But in any case, it was positioned at early stages of a dispute. Now, basically, so these are the three types of possible options of dispute boards. Due to time interest, I will not delve on these further. Just know that there are differences in terms of whether they're binding or not, and also based on what kind of competence is being issued by the parties to the project. So my interest in dispute board for the purpose of Article 25 is because, of course, I'm not trying to copy and paste a dispute board, a private dispute settlement mechanism onto the pandemic agreement, but I think there are some similarities between both sides that actually warrants a consideration of some kind of dispute board mechanism into the pandemic agreement. First of all, you have to get catalysts. When it comes to pandemics, there's the public health aspect, the medical aspect, there are a lot of different catalysts to it. And furthermore, if we want to have a good running pandemic agreement, we are also looking to managing kind of long-term relationship. And the benefit of a dispute board mechanism is that if you have experts serving dispute settlement in a long-term relationship, make sure that these experts are familiar with the operations of the pandemic agreement, it should be able to facilitate further, more expedient dispute settlement if these experts are trusted by the parties and serve their roles. Of course, under the pandemic agreement, there might be two possible ways of using it. You have a permanent body along the agreement, or you set up a dispute board in light of a pandemic emergency. Now, at this point, I'm not sure which one is better, but at least these are possible considerations. But the idea is that to insert them as a pre-arbitration mechanism, so, for example, they can stand out to help the contracting parties avoid possible disputes, or in the case of a negotiation, they can serve as a useful provider of some kind of a similar mediation function in light of the fact that they can provide some kind of a non-binding solutions or yacht based on their knowledge of the operation of the agreement. Now, of course, there are some issues that we have to consider. So that's why I'm not saying that this is a mechanism that is already ready to be considered for the purpose of the pandemic agreement. There are some details that must be sorted out. First of all, how many experts do you want? Definitely not three. I mean, if we're talking about the scale of pandemic, we need more experts. What kind of composition of experts are we looking at? How many medical, legal scientists, etc.? And furthermore, how do we select these experts? Now, this is something that, of course, will be in the minds of the parties, if this is a possible option. Now, basically, I would argue that it should be a standing body. But whether it should be for the pandemic agreement in general, or is it for a certain special situation, that is something that is worthy of consideration. Currently, I would say that it will likely be a non-binding recommendation. Is it possible to put up a binding decision? I'm a bit more reserved on this point. Details of the operation needs to be sorted out. But finally, I think the most important problem is funding. How do we fund an operating standing dispute board in the pandemic agreement? This is especially in light of the continuing problem, in my view, about how the WHO works through its funding. There's always this kind of problem, and I think this problem will also persist if we want to consider this as a supporting mechanism for the operation of the agreement. Right. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. I would like to look forward to your possible questions regarding this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wu, for your presentation. Next, we have Assistant Professor Wei presenting a paper titled Strengthening the Resilience of Pandemic-Related Medical Product Supply Chains, Assessing the Relationship Between the WHO Pandemic Agreement and the WTO. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wu with a round of applause.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizer of this wonderful conference. So, as Professor Wu mentioned, so I just graduated this June, and it's actually my first time to present in a conference in English in Taiwan. So, it's really happy to be back and present in National Chengchi University in this conference and share this topic with you. Namely, so I will be discussing the crucial need to strengthen the resilience of pandemic-related medical product supply chains and how we can better leverage the relationship between the WHO pandemic agreement if it will be entered into force in the future, and how this pandemic agreement can try to kind of encourage or push the WTO to move a little bit forward to be more inclusive in terms of strengthening the medical product supply chain resilience. And also, please bear with me, I am still recovering from the cold got from my daughter, so I will have my mask on in order to protect the health in this room, which is also aligned with the theme of the conference, I guess. Okay, so, well, so needless to say, the COVID-19 pandemic revealed the weakness of our global medical product supply chains. So after that, the countries around the world recognized this issue and the urgent need to have some kind of legal instrument to ensure that how to make sure the medical product distribution can be facilitated without undue disruption from countries' domestic measures, especially the trade restrictive measures such as the export restrictions on some kind of essential medical product. So, and in the WHO pandemic agreement, which started the negotiation a few years ago, is promising accomplishments around the world in the WHO forum. While we do not know when it will enter into force, but at least it is like a remarkable step from the international health governance perspective. But how about the WTO? WTO is the multilateral trade system and governing the free trade and also trading good trading service and the intellectual property rights. In terms of the supply chain, the issue of the supply chain resilience or medical product supply chain and distribution, definitely it will concern the rule or the disciplines under the WTO, like whether countries can have the right to impose the export restriction on certain product for the sake of protecting its own nationals or populations' public health, or if they have such rights, what is the boundary for them to enact that kind of rights? And I think more importantly from my perspective, and I will argue that in my article, is that in addition to discussing like the boundary for the country to adopt those kind of trade restrictive measures, whether WTO should be the forum to proactively persuade or encourage or promote its members to facilitate the medical products distributions during the pandemic, and also whether the WTO can also serve as the forum to have a transparency mechanism or platform for its member to share their need regarding the pandemic-related products. So that will be my main argument. Namely, I think WTO is doing a great job in terms of, not really a great job. I have to rephrase, but I think WTO has certain kind of legal instrument or mechanism trying to impose certain kind of rule for the countries to impose export restriction on medical supply, and also touch upon the issue about whether country can deviate their obligation under the WTO and to impose certain kind of trade restrictive measure on the medical, on the pandemic-related product, like under get Article 20 general exception, or even get Article 21 security exception, if you consider that public health crisis is a type of national security issue. But I think WTO can do more. Like it can its member in the WTO itself can be more proactive and can be more active in actively encourage their member to facilitate the distribution. Okay, so this is just like a visualization, which is really bad from to try to make my research question more hopefully clearer. So as I mentioned, right now the WTO law has the provision that imposes the duty of refraining from, asking or requiring its member to refrain from disturbing the medical product supply chain, namely in case Article 11.1, which said that quantitative restriction on goods shall not, in general, it shall not be imposed. And it also reserves certain regulatory flexibility, on the other hand, for WTO member to pursue their non-trade concern, like get Article 11.2, which immediately follow up the get Article 11.1, which say that countries can impose certain type of export restriction if they face the deficiency in their essential product. And get Article 20 and Article 21, as I said, they are the exception clause. The Article 20 is a general exception. Article 21 is the security exception, which all allow country to deviate their legal obligation under WTO to pursue their policy concern or interest, which definitely include public health protection in the time of the pandemic. What I would like to argue is that the WTO and WTO in the future, after the pandemic agreement enter into force, WTO and the WHO should work together, and in the WTO it should have the mechanism to impose the duty to proactively facilitate the supply chain of the medical product to its member. That's what I would like to highlight in my research. So, because my main argument is that the WTO can be benefited from the implementation of the WHO pandemic agreement. So we have to. I would like to briefly introduce the pandemic agreement, especially focus on its articles regarding the accessibility of the medical product and also the supply chain resilience and disruption in the current version of pandemic agreement, which I also face similar difficulties as Professor Yang, Professor Wu, and Professor Schaefer, that the version is still the version is still changing and ongoing. So there might be some mixture with different versions, but I try to make sure that the current version is the latest one. So basically, in the pandemic agreement is preamble say that one of the goals of this agreement is to strengthen states' capacity in pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And in Article 9.5, it also said that the pandemic agreement shall ensure equitable and affordable access to essential medical products. And it also highlights the legal principle or foundation regarding how to enhance the accessibility of the pandemic-related medical product, which stipulated in Article 3 and Article 13 respectively. So it said that the humanitarian principle shall be the guiding principle of the legal foundation when countries dealing with the issue regarding the medical product supply chain. And there are four the sub-elements regarding the humanitarian principle. This is enshrined in the UN General Assembly resolution, which include the principle of humanity, emphasizing the importance of addressing human suffering whenever it occurs, and with a particular focus on the most vulnerable population. Principle of mutuality, which indicate that humanitarian aid should not favor any party in an emergency situation. Principle of impartiality, which assert that assistance must be provided solely based on need without discrimination. And last but not least, the principle of independence, which underscores the necessity for humanitarian objective to remain free from other non or irrelevant consideration like political, economic, military consideration. So, and in order to realize the humanitarian principle to enable countries to better prepare in response to the future pandemic, the agreement established in Article 13, it established a global supply chain and logistic network. And the function of this network basically has two functions. So in the normal time, the supply chain logistic network will serve as the platform for states to exchange information regarding their needs and potential deficiencies for the specific medical products. But during the pandemic, states shall work together to proactively facilitate the medical product supply chain in a manner consistent with the international humanitarian principle that I just mentioned before. And the pandemic agreement also addresses the issue of negative effect on international trade, just as Professor Lee mentioned in IHR. Actually, the pandemic agreement also underscored the notion that the public health measure or any kind of measure that will affect or disrupt the medical product supply chain should follow certain principles, such as the principle of transparency. It should be reasonable and it should be necessary, etc. So in the relevant article, like Article 13, Article 13b, and Article 14.5, it has some specific requirements that, for example, 13b says that states shall refrain from stockpiling the pandemic-related product that will unnecessarily exceed the domestic need. And Article 14.5 also says that states shall strive to harmonize relevant technical and regulatory requirements and procedure in relation to pandemic-related product. Namely, because in some situations, different countries might have different product standard or product like requirements or technical regulation regarding the medical products. So that will cause certain delay during the pandemic if the emergency happened and the medical product is needed, but it still has to subject to certain kind of inspection or some kind of test. So if country can have some kind of mutual cooperation to reach the regulatory coherence, or even reach the arrangement to mutually recognize each other's standard, etc., then it can facilitate the distribution of the medical product, especially during the time of the pandemic. So that's all the accomplishment or achievements has been done in the WHO regime. But so what about the WTO? So during the pandemic, the WTO basically it established a reporting system under the principle of transparency, which require its members to report or update any kind of trade restrictive measures on the medical products on the medical product the country adopted. But this is only the reporting system, and it has no it make no judgment to the legality, namely the WTO legal consistency of those measures. But from my perspective, it is understandable considering the time, the emergency, and state capability at the time of the pandemic. So how about afterwards? After the pandemic. After the pandemic in 2022, during the ministerial conference, the 12th ministerial conference, MC12, the members of the WTO adopt so-called the Geneva package, which one of the ministerial declaration is especially focused on the COVID-19 state response. And while it reiterated certain principles in the WTO, like any kind of trade restrictive measure on the medical products should be necessary, should be reasonable, etc. But it still fell short in addressing the main concern of my paper, namely whether countries do have the proactive obligation to facilitate distribution of the of the medical product, especially for those developed countries who has the ability and the capability to produce the medical product and is sufficient for their domestic needs. Okay, and I think another the WTO has another issue or deficiency in terms of a pandemic response is that it's basically rely on so-called exceptionalism-oriented justification paradigm. What does that mean? So, as I mentioned, country in general, in principle, they have to follow their obligation, like not to impose the trade restrictive nature on the medical product, not to disrupt the medical product supply chain. But in some, if the WTO member satisfy the requirement under the general exception or the or even the security exception, it can exceptionally adopt the measure, deviating their obligation under the WTO. But this kind of exceptionalism, like mechanism, will, from my perspective, it will create an image that the WTO, in general, is indifferent to the public health governance. Like it is still privileged or is still prioritize their own goal to liberalize international trade. The public health manager can only be legal in exceptional circumstances, and it also lacks a specific provision to ensure the resilience of essential medical product supply chain. From my perspective, as I said, get Article 11.1 only address the passive aspect regarding medical product supply chain, but namely not to impose export restriction on pandemic-related medical product. But it does not instruct or guide the countries or WTO members to actively, especially for those countries with the capability, to actively help those countries without the capability, especially for those developing or the least developed countries. So I would like to propose certain recommendation for the WTO and its member for their consideration in the future. And I think the common ground for the WTO to adopt and its member to adopt this kind of proactive obligation to facilitate the medical product supply chain is the humanitarian principle that I mentioned earlier. So the humanitarian principle actually, to some extent, they do reflect in the certain WTO cover agreement. For example, the WTO agreement, the preamble of the WTO agreement emphasize the trade and the sustainability should be pursued and should be jointly pursued. And also, non-discrimination principle is certain is also kind of the reflection, or their ruling is also has some similarity with the humanity principle. And the prohibition on export restriction also has some reflection on the humanitarian principle that I just mentioned. So I think based on this common ground, namely the humanitarian principles, the WTO should further, and its members should further develop or envisage certain kind of cooperation mechanism or even the legal instrument to govern the issue of facilitating the medical product supply chain. So for the short term, I think the WTO adjudicator, when they are adjudicating the dispute regarding this kind of medical product disruption, they should bear the humanity principles in mind when assessing the dispute in relation to medical product disruption. So for example, even if the member, sorry, my time's up. So I will wrap up my presentation quickly. So just give a quick example regarding the how to how a WHO adjudicator should bear the humanitarian principle in mind. So even if we acknowledge that member has the right to impose the export restriction on medical product in the public health emergency, like if they argue that based on Article 11.2. The standard of review in this kind of case should be more stringent, and some factor can be taken into account. For example, the severity of the situation, like the time of whether the situation or whether the restriction is temporary or not, and whether the negative effects or negative impact that will be caused by this kind of export restriction to other countries. That these all are the factors should be considered and should be strictly considered by the WTO adjudicator and favor the consideration of the public health protection. So this is kind of a short-term proposal. And for the medium-term and the long-term proposal, given that I exhaust, my time is up, so I am happy to further elaborate that in my Q&A section. So thank you very much.
This concludes the presentation for session 2. Now we invite discussants Associate Professor Zhang Zhaotian and Associate Professor Li Bohan to share their commentary on the 3 papers. We first invite Professor Zhang Zhaotian to come to the stage and share some commentary. Please welcome Professor Zhang with warm applause.
Director Professor Yang, and Professor Wu, and all our 3 panelists. It's my pleasure to be able to participate in this very timely and interesting conference. First of all, I summarize all the 3 presentations and its corresponding provisions in the WHO Accord to prove that I did read all of them. And one issue I see across all 3 presentations is, first, how should we position the new accord in relation to existing framework? We're borrowing existing mechanisms like PACS from the Biodiversity Convention or the dispute settlement mechanism from WTO really work? Or should we continue to rely on established systems like the WTO, just as Professor Rowe mentioned? Even with the introduction of a new framework like the WHO Accord, or should we create something entirely new that departs from previous patterns? And the second question, which I believe remains to be old but essential, is how to reconcile the new solidarity framework with national priorities for protecting public health. So, my first point concerns equity and the access and the benefit sharing mechanism. Equity has been a central principle in the WHO Accord. In fact, the term equity or equitable appears more than 10 times throughout the documents. At its core, the Accord seeks to address inequities in the distribution of essential medicines, drugs, and vaccines, and personal protective equipment during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is also, in many ways, a response to the failure of the COVAX system, a mechanism proposed to collect and distribute these critical resources during the pandemic. COVAX failed largely due to insufficient pooling of resources, lack of adequate funding, and the challenges in delivery and storage, particularly for lower income countries. So the question arises, will the new PACS framework truly enhance equity? There have been significant debates over whether 20% reservation of resources proposed in the WHO Accord is sufficient or excessive. Pharmaceutical corporations
argue that such a reservation could stifle innovation. But on the other hand, many non-governmental organizations criticize that it may fall short of meeting international human rights obligations, especially leaving vulnerable populations underserved. And moreover, balancing treaty obligations with domestic priorities has always been a significant challenge. States have the primary responsibility to protect the health of their citizens. The question is then, how a state can balance the responsibility and to share percentage of medical products while simultaneously prioritize protection of its own citizens' health. This becomes particularly difficult for countries facing limited resources, where there are calls for increased investment to fulfill this obligation, but even with such obligation, during emergencies, many states lack sufficient vaccines, which present a critical issue, especially for countries with weaker production capabilities. And a third challenge I see is how to create incentives for participation in this system. We know from the experience of COVAX that some countries opt out from the system, and some countries bypass this system by directly negotiating with large pharmaceutical corporations. So as a result, pharmaceutical corporations and countries who might benefit from pathogen access might not necessarily want to participate in this system, but build other systems from the past. So the question is how the system can incentivize or even compel major pharmaceutical corporations to engage. Looking at past treaties, similar mechanism like access and benefit sharing system has often struggled in the biodiversity convention, and it does not necessarily decrease the doubts on exploitation of vulnerable groups. And regarding the second article on dispute settlement, I agree with Professor Wu that establishing a robust dispute settlement mechanism for pandemic treaty would be a valuable step toward strengthening the independence of the WHO framework with enforceable measures. However, historically, the WHO has played a role in setting standards and coordinating states to formulate collaborative framework, but it has often lacked the power to enforce such standards. So a solid and structured dispute resolution mechanism could enhance the independence and the efficacy of the new WHO court. I also agree that leveraging public health expertise in the dispute resolution process. Given the unique nature of dispute that might arise under the pandemic treaty, and especially the issue of time to make a decision quickly under emergency, I believe that these disputes were quite different from trade-related disputes. However, I also see a challenge is that many issues addressed by the WHO Accord are not really about disputes between parties. Issues like transparency, strengthening regulatory authorities, like in Article 14, or ensuring sustainable financing system in Article 20, are all about compliance rather than direct disputes. So if the WHO Accord is to be enforceable or at least to provide some teeth, it seems that the focus should also be on ensuring accountability and the compliance among contracting parties. For me, this would be similar to human rights conventions, which require member states to submit reports and undergo reviews as a way to ensure compliance with international standards. Regarding the alignment with existing framework, the focus of the third paper, particularly WTO or World Trade System, I agree with that incorporating proactive collaborative obligation into the established trade law system could be a promising approach. The WHO has a solid comprehensive framework that member states are already familiar with, making it an attractive platform for cooperation. However, I also see potential conflicts between these proactive obligations and the existing clauses within trade law, and which often treat public health measures as exceptions and allows waivers of the duty of free trade and cooperation. Additionally, the reliance on the WTO framework for cooperation raises question about the independence of the WHO Accord. Should the Accord be more autonomous rather than depending on the execution of provisions under different framework like the WTO? This raises important questions about the WHO's role and whether it should have a more independent capacity to enforce the treaty's objectives. Another point I would like to raise concern is about the alliance of WHO Accord with human rights law. Existing international conventions, such as International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, include mandates for collaboration. For example, Article 2, Clause 1 of the convention states that member states should fulfill the rights under the convention through international assistance and the cooperation, which resonates with the goals of this WHO Accord. However, a critical question remains. Does the WHO Accord truly adhere to international rights standards? Many human rights organizations have criticized that WHO perceived inactivity or failure to fully uphold the right to health and the right to life. Moreover, there have been calls for derogations of human rights during the pandemic. And the question would be, how will the WHO Accord address this practice? On the one hand, the WHO Accord could provide a baseline framework, even in situations where countries seek to derogate from their human rights obligations during emergency. But however, on the other hand, will there be similar claims for derogation or exemption that could be applied to the WHO Accord when contracting parties seeking exemptions similar to other international frameworks? Another issue, as one of the most discussed, is the alignment with domestic law. So since my time is limited, I will just focus on the experience of Taiwan. Taiwan was once considered to be a successful story in the early stage of COVID-19 pandemic, particularly before the large-scale outbreak in the community. Taiwan's success, I believe, was due to a combination of nationalism as well as global solidarity. We adopt a form of pandemic nationalism, exemplified by the slogan of "One Island, One Destiny," and implemented strict regulations such as border control, border closures, forming a national team for masks, enforcing export restrictions, and developing domestic vaccines to ensure self-reliance. While some of those measures were protective, they might be necessary and effective at a certain moment. However, global solidarity was also crucial during the pandemic, as Taiwan did not want to be isolated from the global community. So this raises the question for the WHO Accord: how will it balance collaboration obligations with national health priorities, especially during emergencies? In Taiwan's case, we face conflicts related to national concerns, especially as we struggle with pandemics that will often lead to virus outbreaks from China. We also need independence. Not totally relying on the productions made in China, and had a different product standards from China. So collaboration could mean trade-off with national security as well as challenges of securing sufficient resources to comply with treaty commitment, which has always been a concern in adopting any international treaties. So let's all have for now. Thanks once again for having me, and I look forward for further discussion.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. Next, we would like to invite Associate Professor Li Bohan to come to stage and provide some comments. Please give him a warm round of applause.
Hello, everyone. I'm Owen Li, currently teaching at the Global Health Program of National Taiwan University. It's an honor for me to join such an amazing line of speakers and commanders today. Honestly, I almost forget how formal people tend to dress in a law conference, so I dress like that. And then when I see everyone in suits, I was like, okay, this is law conference. And then I tend to talk very much when I'm nervous, so in order to restrict my bad habit of going over time, please allow me to read my text. Facing the COVID pandemic, such an unusual situation where the landscape of global health politics and governance was reshuffled, and it has almost disrupted and provoked questions regarding the usefulness, efficiency, representation, and even legitimacy of the WHO, which is expected to assume the leadership in and responsibility for disease control and management, but it almost failed. So in this context, we probably can take the initiative of pandemic treaty negotiation as a step to safety organizations face a name. In response to the EU and African Union's calls for a better legal instrument than the current international health regulations. So I wasn't able to really trace all the versions all the way because as a lot of people have mentioned, it changed all the time. And to avoid confusion and over-messiness, I'm mainly quoting the zero draft published earlier in February 2023 and the current draft of May 2024. So along the process, as many of you mentioned, I also observed that the gradually downplayed role of human rights discourse across different versions of the treaty text. I don't really know why, but as Professor Chongling Li has mentioned, it's just not popular. But interestingly, a similar situation also happens to ideas surrounding solidarity and equity, while more practical and technical provisions informed by sovereignty concerns and interstate disparities have been added. As Professor Chongling Li mentioned in the first session, human rights are not popular among national delegates because they would signpost concerns about political accountability and legal responsibility of the states. I may not want to jump into the conclusion to say that human rights principles are no longer important, but now I can see they are less signified with a much less complicated framing of human rights and relevant obligations, which means they have been downplayed by replaced with much simpler languages. So for example, Article 14 in the zero draft on protection of human rights was completely removed, as mentioned by Professor Li. However, as Professor Peikan also mentioned, some doors are closing, as terminologies that were broadly defined and loosely scoped in previous drafts have been modified and even removed, leaving little room for leveraging and voicing concerns, not only for Taiwan as a non-member state, but also for civil society organizations representing vulnerable groups. For instance, special attention to indigenous people and vulnerable populations no longer exists. And the clauses that emphasize the importance of non-discrimination and the necessity and proportionality principles in limiting personal freedoms also disappear. Well, on the other hand, the issue was picked up by the negotiation over the revision process of the international health regulations in another platform. So it is an interesting development if we put two in comparison. Regardless, we still could detect and sense the remains, I would say remains, because most of them, they don't use human rights, this terminology anymore, but we still can sense the remains of the human rights concerns from provisions that do not necessarily use rights and obligations languages. For example, the long contested creation of the term, such as persons in vulnerable situations, or the references to social and environmental determinants of health in relation to health inequalities, and the legalization of the whole of everything everyone approach. So for example, the preamble and the definitions of One Health, as well as persons in vulnerable situations, still touch upon non-biomedical determinants of inequalities in health and access to health care before and during the pandemic, which, as COVID has taught us, would result in disparities in resilience and recovery processes across populations and societies. We still could see the terms and wording that are bracketed, so which means still under negotiation, because the green parts are those now we can consider as reaching consensus, as indicated by the Secretariat. But those sentences or those wordings still in bracket are still subject to discussion and may disappear in the future. So we don't know how further narrow down would happen in later negotiation. In comparison, the original proposal, the zero draft, contained a more innovative and inclusive approach to defining differential vulnerability that reflects the momentum and evidence from the body of the literature on health and human rights studies. The annotations in the original text also represent the diverse concerns of different blocks of countries. So you can see in the previous draft, different countries proposed their wording in order to revise the original proposal from the negotiation body. And you can see they also represent their concerns from their regional perspectives. The conceptualization of persons in vulnerable situations, although now defined narrowly, but still plays an important role in the whole text. It appears in current Article 6 on preparedness, readiness, and health system resilience. Interestingly, although it is defined much narrowly, but it still appears along the text as if it is still important and requires global attention. As well as in Article 13, which is about the regulations over supply chain and logistics. Also in Article 17 on the whole government and whole of society approaches to pandemic prevention and response, whose necessity and usefulness have been proven and accentuated by many social science studies during the pandemic time, during the COVID time, in which differential vulnerabilities, capacities, and resilience across populations have to be identified and acknowledged by all health authorities, of course, including global, regional, and local health authorities. Interestingly, despite the removal of the non-discrimination and gender equality clauses from the current text, they reappear in Article 13. Oh, sorry, I missed something. Here, sorry. So the non-discrimination and gender equality clauses reappear in Article 7 about the rights and treatment of health and care workers, in which the state has the obligation to protect, also the obligation to fulfill, although the human rights language remains silent. So I don't really know it was on purpose or anything else, because you still can sense the human rights discourse behind the text, although they don't use the term. Also interestingly, Article 26 on the relationship between this pandemic treaty and other international agreements emphasize the principles of coherence and harmonization between state obligations under international law, which seems to respond to Professor Mao's concerns about the tension between the trade and the health regimes. However, as implied, again, still implied, or maybe just out of my own wishful thinking, I would argue that international human rights treaties are to be considered as well, which may be taken as complementary to, rather than in conflict with, the interpretations of the pandemic treaty provisions when necessary. This may include the use of individual communication mechanisms for human rights violations at the treaty-based human rights committees, as it has been the case during the COVID time as well. But of course, this still cannot solve Professor Wu Xian's concern about the lack of dispute settlement mechanisms in the current draft. However, at least probably for human rights concerns, there's still a platform for them to be solved. So I'm aware of my time, and I'm good with time control today. So in conclusion, as we can see here, which seems to be a temporary consensus already, the human rights principles, including the right to health, shall guide the pandemic response activities along with other principles, such as international humanitarian law, equity, solidarity, evidence-informed decision-making, and of course, as Owen just reminded us, state sovereign rights over domestic legislations and policymaking. Nonetheless, to what extent the sovereignty clause only indicates nationalism, I think it's contested. What it means that it may also be used or misused to justify non-inclusion of peoples who are misrepresented by a state that do not have control over them. As reiterated by different speakers today this afternoon, a way forward to think about the inclusion of Taiwan in such an important moment for global health governance, when a pandemic treaty is being drafted and under negotiation, which may be embedded in such so-called wishing future envisioned by this process. The wishfulness in the sociological terms can be considered as a practice considering prefigurated by politics, from which a future we will have will be actualized by the way we do it now, rather than what we wish it to be. So, but however, act otherwise. So if taking the recent discussion and evidence regarding the political and legal determinants of health, that is, health is not only just political, but also much predetermined by how policies are made, what laws exist or not exist, and how they are implemented and governed. Then, with the exclusion of Taiwan and many other territories and nations which cannot be considered as a state in this forum, we probably can argue that the current treaty-making process is far from the principles the draft text tries to pronounce. It is an irony, if not hypocrisy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zhang and Lee, for your insightful commentary. Now we invite Chairperson Wu Jianhui to host the Q&A session.
So we will have about 10 minutes for Q&A. I have my personal comment and question, but I will send it to the final. So is there any questions, comments coming from the floor? That would be much appreciated.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, and I have each one of you short questions or comments. Okay, for Professor Schaefer regarding tax, I think that we all know that previously that material transfer is very important for us to develop a vaccine. But what if that right now, I think that if you can only have the DNA sequence, such kind of information might already be sufficient for the company to have able to develop a vaccine. Will be that kind of circumstances affect the overall incentive for other Western countries to be able to join the mechanism. Okay, so I think this would be the one that I would like dispute settlement system is very important for most of the institutional and international law to be able to enforce. We know that, but I think that for the current moment for the WHO, that it might not be the most emergent consideration for the negotiators. So for me, I think that probably you can at least imagine or provide some what type of dispute that might be occurs in the future. So, for example, what is that there might a lot of obligations to be able to fulfill in the agreement, and what if that the country or state may not be able to comply? So I think that I agree with Professor Zhao Dian. Most of the time will be the compliance issue instead of dispute settlement procedures. So if we can imagine what kind of type of dispute that could be really occurs in the future, then that would be the starting point for us to have further discussion to design what kind of mechanism will be most effective to solve that kind of dispute. Okay, so this will be the question for you to be able to think about. As for Maui, I think that it's still very good for you to be able to combine WHO and the WTO area of issues. But I think that as for your second column, that WHO do not have the material to actively facilitate the supply chain. Okay, and I think that this is not what the WTO is supposed to do. Okay, so my question for you is that what if that we can have use a trade tool to achieve health goal? Okay, that is the approach that I think that we can think about, because right now under the WHO, what we have discussed is that we need to have a very effective enforcement mechanism, right? Try to provide incentives for state to be able to join. And how about we can introduce some kind of real benefit that is trade related, using trade as a tool or incentivize the state to be able to be able to join the WHO. I mean the comply with the WHO code. Okay, so this might be another way of combining these two regimes. As at least the WTO cannot be a dragging feet. Okay, they cannot hold up all effort that we done in WHO. But in order to facilitate, I don't think that WTO can do too much. If yes, then it's still already done. So for example, you can reduce the tariff for those products they can trade. But effectively, you want to make sure that WHO obligation, those obligations all can be done under the WHO setting, the pandemic setting. Can you provide trade mechanism, trade tools to help it? Okay, so this is maybe the question for you to think about. Thank you.
So I would say for Dennis, for each at least 2 minutes to respond. I have very quick, short question. The first one for Owen. You talk about the ethical obligation for states. What about the ethical obligation for private individuals or big enterprise? Because during the pandemic, one of the key actors is not states. Of course, U.S. is key actor, but Bill Gates is also important, or Gates and Melinda Foundation, or COVAX. So what is their role in terms of ethical obligations? I think it has been missing during our discussion. The second one, for Wu Xian. Actually, I don't see, I agree with Zhang Daotian, and I don't see there will be so many disputes. And again, Professor Yang mentioned is the compliance issues. So, of course, compliance issue can be a dispute if one state is willing to bring a case. But from my perspective, the most important thing is if there's a dispute, it's a dispute around the World Health Organization itself. The question here is how we break the organization. If I can use Trump's term, is Wuhan. The WHO is Wuhan. So then how could we, or how should we bring this organization into account? And this is, I think, the real dispute resolution, which is a trend for international lawyers. And finally, the question for Remark and also for Han, I share with, okay, I mean, in these days we talk about resilience. It's not only, the first question is whether our trade organization is still relevant in these days. And the second one, if we talk about resilience, it's not leading to export restrictions. If we use Article 21, and if we securitize everything, human health security, then does it make sense to compromise dispute resolution and this stuff? Because if we talk about resilience, then we are talking about how to analyze other countries, and we don't buy so much on trade rules. And here, I think there's another point Owen just mentioned. Article 26 and paragraph 3, he mentioned about other treaties or other international agreements. It is not leading to WTO agreement. It can be international human rights. But here, the most important thing is it states under any obligation to take care of the human rights of foreigners of other countries. It goes back to the first question by Owen. It states under any obligation, international human rights obligations, to take into the rights, human rights of foreigners or aliens. And I think each of you have 2 minutes, which is not fair, which is inequitable to respond.
It's fair in the sense we all get 2 minutes. Okay, I'll try to quickly address those 2 questions. Thanks very much for that. On the first point about the limitation of PABs, and it is a limitation on PABs, of the loophole of the second enforcement mechanism is, well, couldn't pharma companies and other companies get access to samples of data from other sources than PABs? And it's true, there's nothing in the treaty that bans that route. So that's a possible end run around it. I still think, though, there is significant value despite that loophole. Firstly, because despite that loophole being potentially existing, if enough countries are committing to contributing to PABs, and actually in the zero draft there's an obligation to actually contribute samples to PABs, then as a matter of practice, if a pharmaceutical company attempts this end run, they will have less access and less quick access to up-to-date samples. So I think there's historical precedent for this from 2006, when Indonesia famously declined to share samples for influenza outbreak with WHO on the grounds of lack of reciprocity. And it was difficult to do an end run around that in that context. So they had relevant samples that they were playing hardball with. So you have enough countries that are actually committing to this system, and if you take the kind of likelihood of pandemics emerging from anywhere in the world, there's a good chance that that loophole will be avoided. But it's still possible to get around that loophole. Another way of getting around it is if the pathogen originates in the country's own domestic borders. That is something to be said in favor of direct enforcement of the first mechanism. Running out of time. On the other question about what about ethical obligations of other parties, I agree. I have another paper on ethical obligations of pharmaceutical companies in global health emergencies. But I will note that those will not be party to the pandemic accord. So enforcement on them has to be indirect. And so PABs, the PABs enforcement will either be via sovereign nations compelling those companies or themselves purchasing from them compliant to their treaty obligation, or it will be via those material transfer arrangements. So again, if a pharmaceutical company wants to get access to those samples from PABs, they'll have to sign that arrangement and commit to the 10+10 arrangement. So I think that it's important that the pandemic treaty has mechanisms to enforce its obligations, even if the pharmaceutical companies or Bill and Melinda Gates are not direct signatories to the treaty.
Thank you, Liu and Professor Young for your question. So I think both of you referred to the same question, so I'll just answer it together. Basically, let me answer in 3 parts. First of all, I do agree that if we look into the current design of the Pathogen agreement, it's about compliance. A lot of times it's about whether you comply with the obligations within the terms. And to that extent, indeed, the design of Article 5, which names dispute settlement, is a bit intriguing in that respect. But I will take a guess here. Now, since nothing in this whole pandemic agreement points to some kind of prosecutory-like system, I think eventually when it comes to non-compliance, currently the pandemic agreement seems to rely on the actively raising a dispute as a means of inducing compliance with the terms. I think that this is maybe a more reasonable explanation of its dispute settlement mechanisms in its current design. I mean, apparently for the negotiators, they are not interested in saying that we have some kind of a body within the secretariat for this agreement to always oversee and check compliance, rather than let the contracting parties work those things out. If that is the case, the current dispute settlement mechanism does, in my view, make sense because all compliances can be translated into some kind of a dispute in which certain members are not happy that certain members, the other group of members or one member is not happy with the terms of the pandemic agreement. Now, third layer I want to talk about is in respect of what kind of obligation this is. Now, I didn't mention this in my original presentation, but indeed, the current writing of the pandemic agreement actually leads to a question of whether there's any very hard obligation in place. A lot of these rules are done in a way that says to the best or actively do something or within what is within the laws and regulations of that specific contracting party. It is intentionally written in a way that indicates some kind of a soft obligation at most, rather than saying that this is like the traditional kind of hard obligation. And this also leads to a question of what does dispute settlement do? Because in this sense, maybe there is even some serious problem about what do we mean by compliance here. A lot of the times, when members do something, fails to do something, that doesn't necessarily lead to a violation. So a lot of these terms might lead to active blocking. So for example, in Article 10, to actively support relevant WHO technology, skills, and knowledge transfer within this provision, I mean, is it non-transfer constituted blocking of a violation, or is it actually blocking the transition be the problem? In this respect, I think it's more about this part. Maybe it's going to work in a way that sounds like human rights law in the sense that the objective will provide clarity, further basis for interpretation of the terms, and possibly how applications will be developed through that interpretation process, but not in its current text itself. But if that is the case, indeed, dispute settlement would be something that would serve certain rules in the design of the pandemic agreement. But that is my current evaluation of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yang and Professor Wu, for very challenging question. I do agree with Professor Yang that, I mean, in the face that the WTO might not be the most suitable or appropriate forum to address the issue about the medical product supply chain. And currently, the current version of my article, I think, does touch upon or try to argue that at least the WTO law should not become the barrier or hamper its members to proactively adopt the measure that try to proactively facilitate the medical product supply chain. And I fully agree that the trade incentive, how to incentivize the countries to implement the pandemic agreement through some kind of trade tools under the WTO might be and I think this is very important, and I will address that in my article. Currently, I do touch upon that in my long-term proposal, saying that in the WTO should try to have some kind of like capacity building program for or fund the developed countries' manufacturers to actively facilitate the distribution or the manufacture of the medical product supply, and this kind of like economic incentive or the financial contribution should not be considered as a subsidy under the SCM agreement, etc. And I think another more practical, another consideration to use WTO as a leverage to enforce the WHO pandemic agreement is also relating to the dispute settlement mechanisms, dispute resolutions consideration. Like currently, the WHO pandemic agreement, as Professor Wu Xian just highlighted, it is not really like a rule-driven dispute settlement mechanism. So if there's any dispute happen relating to a supply chain, a medical product supply chain issue, it cannot be like perfectly resolved under the WHO. But if the WTO also take the lead or involved in the management or regulation regarding the medical product supply chain, then this kind of issue can be better resolved under WTO, even if WTO also has its own dilemma and difficulty right now, but it still has a more powerful dispute settlement mechanism to address this issue. And turn to Professor Wu's question. Yes, I think it's the resilience right now seems not sometimes not aligned with the international reality. Like some for the public health or in response to the public health crisis, countries might not put the resilience as their first priority. They will focus on their own population and their own interests. And yes, whether other countries' human rights do matter in this case, and how to formulate the legal foundation to say you should also taking care of other countries' human rights consideration. I think that's the kind of the argument I would like to make in my paper, that the humanitarian, especially during the pandemic, the humanitarian principles should be the guiding principle for countries. I mean, it's definitely from from a scholar's perspective, it might be not equal. And I think when countries considering to adopt certain trade restrictive measures on medical products in order to protect its own national, it should still bear the humanitarian principle in their mind, and to make a better or more taking care of other countries, put more emphasis to other countries. If you have the capability to manufacture, or you have sufficient medical device, then in that circumstance you should not adopt the trade restrictive measure and saying that you want to prevent the future possible potential insufficiency, so that you want to adopt the trade restrictive measure. In that case, you should not. This kind of trade restrictive measure for the preventative purpose should not be allowed according to the humanitarian principle. I hope that to some extent answer your question.
Is any questions from the floor, especially for our young researchers, the young students? Okay, please.
May I have some response?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The final one. Yeah, 1 minute. You are more important than others.
No, I'm going to be quick. Okay. So I just want to have a quick response to Professor Wu's questions and concern, because in the current treaty text, it contains many provisions which allow for considerations regarding national circumstances, which means it authorizes the government to prioritize based on its national priorities. So which actually also reflects the principles under the ICSCR, which requests the government or the state to solve their own human rights concerns as immediate obligations, followed by international cooperation and collaboration. So there's still a hierarchy between human rights obligations, especially regarding public health measures. But on the other hand, I also want to emphasize that in the current treaty and also along the negotiation process, the national delegates keep emphasizing that solidarity is not just a norm, but also a fact, especially in the circumstances of infectious diseases. So in terms of rebuilding resilience, if we cannot really take care of others, then one day it will strike back to us again. So I think that's why solidarity principle is still retained in the current text. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I would hand my book to Ms. Yang. You would kind of conversation with
Both sessions of today's conference have concluded successfully. We now invite Professor Yang Pei-Kan to deliver the closing remarks.
Okay, so thank you for coming, and I see a lot of friends, and actually your participants is very high quality professor from the Wu, Director Wu, and Xiao. I'm very grateful for you to be able to join us. And right now I will most thank you for our guest speakers, Professor Schaefer and Professor Takuma, come all the way from Singapore and Japan to Taipei. So without further ado, I can present a very short gift for you right now, and then the souvenir that we bought it from our universities. Please come with a short break. Short.
One, two, three. One more. 1, 2, 3. Last one. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
And
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. Last one. 1, 2, 3. All right.
okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that this definitely is not the end of discussion. Okay, so I think that we will have another chance to be able to meet and maybe find because the issue is still ongoing, and I personally learned a lot from your presentation as well as the discussion. It's a really fruitful discussion and share of experience and expertise, I think. So anyways, thank you very much for coming, and I wish you if you have a safe journey back home and everything is right. Okay, thank you for